to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon. It's 12 noon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Friday lunchtime. Off the rails again. Tens of thousands of commuters hit once again as Train Drivers Union ASLEF stages its latest walkout. They'll be joined tomorrow by the RMT with industrial action that could hit travellers trying to get to Eurovision in Liverpool. There's no ticket to ride this weekend. The UK's economy grew over the first quarter of the year, but only just. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says it's good news. Labour's Sir Keir Starmer says the 0.1% increase is nothing to celebrate. Who's right? And reports suggest that net migration in the UK could be as high as 1 million people, despite the government's pledge back in 2019 to bring the figures down. Is it another broken promise? And also coming up, Liverpool tuning up for Eurovision, but has it hit a sour note with their ban on President Zelensky joining the celebrations? First, let's get an up. But worth waiting for, all the latest news headlines coming up with Rhiannon.
So keen to throw to me, Mark. So keen. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12, your top stories from the GB newsroom. And some breaking news in the last few minutes. Royal Mail's chief executive is to step down. Simon Thompson's expected to leave the role in October after around 2.5 years in the job. Last month, Royal Mail agreed a deal with the Communication Workers Union, with staff getting a 10% salary increase and a £500 one-off payment. After a difficult couple of years in the company, Mr Thompson says he believes it's the right time to move forward under new leadership. And Pakistan's ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan is to be released on bail for 2 weeks. The decision from the High Court in Islamabad comes a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest on corruption charges was illegal. The events earlier this week have sparked unrest in the country, with almost 2,000 people arrested so far. Authorities have tightened security in the capital, with Mr Khan's supporters expected to march in protest. Imran Khan denies any wrongdoing. Passengers are today facing widespread disruption across the network due to the latest round of train strikes. Members of the ASLEF union are walking out at more than a dozen train operators in a long-running dispute over pay. Tomorrow, RMT members go on strike on the day of the Eurovision Song Contest final in Liverpool. Further strikes by the union will be held on May the 31st and June the 3rd, the day of the FA Cup final at Wembley. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman told GB News the strikes are disappointing.
We have been able to facilitate an offer which has been put to the union leaders. The problem we've got is that they won't put it forward to their members. Similar offers have been put forward to other members of unions and they've accepted them. So logic would dictate if the union leaders did the same, we could see an end to this action. And I'm really sorry for all passengers who have been disrupted today.
The UK economy grew ever so slightly in the first 3 months of the year, but contracted in March, according to official figures. Growth of 0.1% was recorded by the Office for National Statistics in the first quarter. But in March, the economy shrank by 0.3%, mostly driven by a fall in retail and car sales, as well as ongoing strike action. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says although the slight growth is a positive step, there's more work to be done.
Well, these are much better figures than anyone would possibly have predicted, even 3 months ago. And that's partly because of what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday, measures in the budget that are helping to help companies to recruit, tackle some of the underlying problems in the economy. But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, meanwhile, says it's simply not good enough.
Well, this is nothing to celebrate, and it's yet more low growth on the back of 13 years of low growth. And I think the essential question many people today will be asking themselves is, do I feel any better off now than I did 13 years ago when this government started? And I think the resounding answer to that around the country will be no, I don't.
Elsewhere, Russia has denied reports Ukrainian forces have broken through at various points along the front line, saying the military situation is under control. It comes after Russian military bloggers reported Ukraine was making advances towards the city of Bakhmut, with some suggesting a counter-offensive has started. The Kremlin's denied the claims, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has also said the long-awaited counter-offensive has yet to start. Military historian Chris Newton explained to GB News why Bakhmut is such a key area.
Perhaps what they're doing by attacking in Bakhmut, they're kind of forcing the Russians to divert resources from the south, which is where everyone thinks the counter-attack is, the main attack is going to come, to the east, so that they're forcing the Russians with dwindling manpower to commit in different places, and that would hopefully soften up for the Russians in the south for a potential main attack.
And back here, a world-leading cancer centre hit by claims of alleged staff bullying has been downgraded by a health watchdog. The Christie NHS Foundation Trust in Manchester has been told it requires improvement in safety and leadership by the Care Quality Commission. A previous review commissioned in 2020 by NHS England found current and former staff had reported inappropriate behaviour, unfair treatment and abuse of positional power. In the new CQC report, the Trust's overall grading has been downgraded from outstanding to good. The Trust says it's working hard to ensure staff feel supported. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. So it seems most of Britain is off the rails once more, just when it seemed for the travelling public that things might have been getting back on track. Both ASLEF and the RMT have pulled their strike levers once more. ASLEF General Secretary McWhelan accusing the government of acting in bad faith and abandoning any direct talks with the union. But Rail Minister Hugh Merriman, well, he's criticised unions over the timing of their strikes.
With a weekend coming up with Eurovision, the FA Cup final, it feels like events have been targeted deliberately to really impact people the most. And it's really regrettable on Eurovision, which we're hosting for our friends in Ukraine. And it's not good enough for them to say they didn't realise that the events were on, which is what we've been hearing this morning from Mick Whelan, because either he doesn't have a very good sporting and cultural diary, or once he was told, he could have changed the dates so they didn't impact. I mean, Eurovision is a great celebration. We should be really proud to host that.
Well, it's the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, speaking to us a little earlier. Let's get the latest picture now of how it's affecting people across the country. Let's go to Scotland and join our reporter there, Tony Maguire, at the ASLEF picket line in Glasgow. And Tony, just to pick up what ASLEF and Mick Whelan was saying, they've accused the government really of sort of walking away from trying to negotiate on this, leaving it to the train companies themselves and this rail group, the rail delivery group.
Yeah, well, it very much at this point feels like the longest he said, she said of all time. We're about 11 months into this dispute now, beginning in June last year, and certainly it doesn't seem to be getting any headway. Now, 27th of April, a 4% pay increase was put to the union in ASLEF, which was denied. They say that they haven't had a pay increase for their drivers in 4 years now. So indeed they took to the picket lines today, both here in Glasgow and in Edinburgh, as well as a rail depot in South Glasgow. Now, speaking to members of the public today, you know, a lot of them may not be affected today, but obviously with the RMT strike tomorrow, it seems to be that everybody in some level is going to be affected. I did speak to one woman, fortunately we did have our clip in time for you in this hour, but she had planned a trip to go and see her sister in London for months. Now, all of that was put on hold. The family are splitting up, with some going to try their luck with various connecting trains down south, and Brenda herself just going to stay at home this weekend. So the disruption is there. ASLEF say that it wasn't intentional, that the strike dates that they've planned go over Eurovision and over the FA Cup final at the start of June, and certainly it feels like this isn't really going to be resolved anytime soon. The government, as you say, very much feel like they're letting the other parties take control, and ASLEF, from the sounds of various statements across multiple news sources this morning, wanting far more involvement from the Conservative government in Westminster.
Yeah, I think there are some ScotRail services running this weekend, but for those people you've spoken to, I mean, is there still support for the union's position, or is there growing frustration now?
Yeah, of course, ScotRail settled in the middle of last year, but I think that the number of commuters... Yeah, the number of commuters that are looking to get around, and of course, Avanti West Coast, they serve England and North Wales, and they are all looking for alternative routes. The advice to commuters, had they been travelling today or indeed tomorrow on trains that are cancelled, get a refund and look for an alternative way to down south.
OK, Tony, thank you very much indeed for that in Glasgow. And, of course, we'll update you with the position at the various stations and rails. But about 12 operating companies being affected today. What does that leave the travellers able to do? Let's speak now to Mark Venables, who's Managing Director of Megabus. Mark, presumably you've been putting some extra services on to cope with the demand.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, just yesterday we had website visitors to the Megabus website that were about a third more than we'd expect for a typical Thursday, and overall sales took us by surprise yesterday, particularly as you were saying, around Liverpool, in and out of Liverpool, and also as your reporter was just saying, there are alternatives available. We have direct services from Glasgow and Edinburgh to London and cover almost all of the big cities in the UK. So what I'd encourage people to do, if they do need to get around and they are having a look and they're not used to travelling by coach or with Megabus or Scottish CityLink within Scotland, please do have a look at the website and try to book early if you can, because it's really taken off with the rail strikes.
Yeah, but presumably you're only dealing with hundreds that you can actually carry, whereas, of course, thousands, even tens of thousands on the rail network.
Yeah, normally trains you can get more people on, but we can add more coaches, and we've been frantically doing that over the last few days, just putting on as many services as we possibly can When we first saw the trend coming, and I think when the public got to the point where they realised that the strikes were real, they're going to happen, people do look for alternatives, and so we ramp up as far as we possibly can.
Now, of course, tomorrow the RMT are taking their action, as of today, and as people have pointed out, that's going to affect those trying to get to Eurovision to Liverpool. Have you got a Liverpool Express service up and running?
We have. I mean, Manchester Liverpool has really become very popular, but it's not just Manchester. It's places like Preston and places further afield like London. So yes, we put on extra services, and even right now this afternoon we are trying to secure extra coaches. It's busy out there though. It's a popular time of year anyway. I think there's quite a bit of displaced demand from Easter generally for leisure activity and for travel. I think the weather over Easter wasn't very good, and everyone had their eye on May and the 3 bank holidays in May and Eurovision and other events. We've got FA Cup finals in Scotland and in England. So there's an awful lot going on, which is great. I think great for the economy. As long as we can step in and help people move around.
OK, well, wish you the best with that. And, of course, as you say, people should get in touch as soon as they can to secure places. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News. Let's actually bring you some breaking news now in reaction to a report in the Daily Telegraph about net migration. That report suggesting that when the figures are released on May 25th, net migration could hit nearly 1 million. Downing Street has just said it remains the Prime Minister's intention to reduce migration, and indications that it could surpass the previous peak of 504,000 set back in the year to June 2022. A spokesman for Rishi Sunak saying, "I'm not going to get ahead and start speculating, but the Prime Minister's overall commitment is to reduce migration overall. That's what we're trying to do. Our points-based system allows us flexibility on our own needs," saying that Number 10 did not believe Mr Sunak had ever put a figure on how much he would like to see migration fall. But just to reflect, Sir Keir Starmer for Labour said the report suggested that the government had completely lost control. Well, the report suggests the surge in arrivals being largely fuelled by non-EU migrants entering the country to work, to study, or, of course, to flee conflict. Well, to break down the figures for us now is independent statistician, former head of health analysis at the ONS, Office for National Statistics, Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, thank you for your time. We should just obviously reiterate, these are not official figures as yet. They are estimates. I think 997,000, one estimate, but another that it could be as low as 650,000.
Yeah, good afternoon. So, yeah, they're right. They're not the official figures. They'll come up in a couple of weeks, but you can look at other data that the government kind of publishes to kind of get an indication as to what goes on and what you might end up with, because the ONS will collate a range of different data sources when they will give the official estimate in a couple of weeks. But what we do know is if we look at the number of visas that have been issued in, say, 2022 overall, we can see a sharp increase in that. And part of the things that are driving that is a lot of students, postgraduate students, and people who are coming over as kind of family members of postgraduate students. That's been going up. So that's part of the reason we're probably going to see this increase. Just to give some kind of context, in about 2018, we had about 13,000 family members joining postgraduate students. That's up to about 136,000 if you look at the 2022 figures, like a tenfold increase. So I think we are heading for a bigger number. So Rishi Sunak may be talking about, he hasn't put a figure on lowering the number. But I think what we need to remember here, Mark, is that the government and the Office for National Statistics themselves do projections of what the population is going to be over the next, say, 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
They're putting net migration around 240,000 over the next couple of years. So if we hit 500,000 in the recent figures and then another 1 million potentially in this, that means that we've had in 2 years, 7 years worth of migration, and the government plans all the services around the numbers that the ONS produce. So there's a big, huge shortfall in terms of the service provision for this level of migration.
OK, but what about the movement the other way? Because, of course, we would have lost a lot of people going back to particularly Eastern Europe, we know, from service industries here in Britain after we left the EU.
Yeah, so the 500,000 that we did have last year, that is the net figure. So we had over 1 million kind of people coming in, and then you take off those going out. So what they're talking about this morning now is that this is a net figure. So you probably find that we'll have more people coming in overall than the 1 million. And then you take off those who have left. And what seems to be driving it, Mark, is non-EU kind of people. They talk about the point system that's come in. It is generally people from outside of the European Union. What we have seen since Brexit is the movements between the different countries. Obviously, working is a bit more restricted in terms of just the freedom of movement there. So it's more people outside of the European Union that are driving these things. I mean, you still have underlying things like the settlement scheme for the Ukrainians. You've got Hong Kong British nationals who've got opportunity to come over to the country as well. So there are different factors at play there.
Yeah, and obviously the situation could be they are then of net benefit to the economy, if you like, if they are coming in with, for instance, specific skills. But I know that one of the issues the government is looking at is the visas issue to the family members of students particularly. I think there's one figure suggesting up to December 2022, there's 135,788 applying for such visas.
And that's the number I've just explained. It's gone up kind of tenfold since 2018. So I think that is something to look on. But you're right, in terms of the net migration, one of the ticking time bombs we've got from a demographic problem in this country is we've been having fewer births over the last, say, 20 years. We've got an ageing population. We have got these vacancies. So in a way, you kind of rely on migration to continue to make sure all the jobs can be done. But the big issue, Mark, is, like I say, the infrastructure and the service provision is not it's not keeping up pace with the levels of migration that we're seeing. And that's what puts services at a breaking point. So if the government want to accept these bigger numbers, they've got to then put the money in and invest in the services to ensure that everybody can kind of live within their kind of means in terms of the proper service provisions.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, I think the official figures, is it May the 25th, will be coming out. And I guess they also give a projection as to what they think might be happening then for the next year onwards.
So the figures that will come up would just give us the indication as to what's gone on. Separately, the ONS will look at these numbers and project things going forward. But obviously, if they're going up from 500,000 northwards of that, it's unlikely under Rishi Sunak's tenure or perhaps for the next 5 years, we're going to get anywhere near the tens of thousands that some Tory ministers have talked about in the past.
Yes, of course, going back to that 2019 pledge, you remember those figures. Jamie, as ever, thank you for updating us and taking through all the figures, which, as we say, still not official, but they're on their way. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we'll be looking at the latest economic picture. We've got growth in the economy, but only just. What we do know is going up. Well, it's that interest rate decision yesterday. What's that going to do for homeowners? We'll be discussing that in a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, the latest figures show that Britain's economy grew for the first 3 months, but by only 0.1%. Tiny amount. But for March alone, it actually contracted by 0.3%. That's been driven by poor performance in the services sector, we're told. Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said it was nothing to celebrate. But this was the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt's reaction earlier.
Well, these are much better figures than anyone would possibly have predicted, even 3 months ago, and that's partly because of what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday, measures in the budget that are helping to help companies to recruit, tackle some of the underlying problems in the economy. But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
That was the Chancellor speaking earlier. Well, let's also reflect we had to take on board the 12th consecutive interest rate rise yesterday, up to 4.5%. It's hitting thousands of mortgage holders, of course, and those who are trying to get onto the housing ladder. Let's speak now to property expert Russell Quirk, who can join us. Russell, I'm just wondering what the mortgage market has made of this, because there was a report yesterday from Knight Frank, one of the posh estate agents, saying that a lot of stuff had been priced into the market already.
Well, we should remember a few things, Mark, I think. That first of all, not everybody has a mortgage. About a third of homeowners do not have a mortgage, so therefore are not directly affected by interest rate movements. And of the remainder that do have a mortgage, the vast majority are on fixed rates. And of course, fixed rates, by the very nature of what they are, stay at that rate until the end of that product. So there's actually a minority of people that have mortgages that will be affected by a Bank of England base rate increase, as we saw yesterday. But I guess we should be a little concerned about sentiment because, of course, Bank of England base rate going up, fairly lacklustre GDP figures today, albeit some growth, but certainly not a recession. The recession actually that lots and lots of experts, including the Bank of England, predicted, that has not come to pass. But, no one, I think, can put too much of a gloss on this and say it's good news as such. It's just not that it's very bad news. And also, Mike, if I just make the point, your clip there, Jeremy Hunt, I mean, he would take the credit for this not being as terrible as it could be, wouldn't he? But at the same time, look, I have to say that the government can take absolutely no credit whatsoever, either for trying to reduce inflation, because, of course, that is the domain of the Bank of England being independent, but also to make a political point here that will indirectly, potentially kind of affect homeowners and so on in terms of anything by way of any negativity in the housing market. It is the fact that the government's quest to increase taxes at every available opportunity, whether it be stamp duty, whether it be income tax, corporation tax has gone up from 19 to 25%, is hardly a recipe for growth, is it?
Well, this is the point Sir Keir Starmer's made. This is nothing to celebrate. More low growth on the back of 13 years of low growth. But just to address the housing sector itself, because, of course, that does lead into confidence or not in terms of the rest of the economy. For a lot of people who have got these 2 or 5 year fixed rate deals, they are coming to an end and they're being faced with quite a nasty shock, aren't they?
Yeah, without doubt. If you'd fixed a couple of years ago, you would have fixed at something between 2 and 2.5%.
Yeah.
Now you're looking at a fixed rate of somewhere around 5%. But we should also remember that actually previous governments have introduced a thing called the MMR, the mortgage review, which ensures now that when lenders actually lend money on a mortgage, that there's what's called a stress test included. So anyone that will see that increase in rates and therefore mortgage costs on a monthly basis actually should be able to afford a 5% rate or the equivalent mortgage rate based on a Bank of England rate because of that stress test that was put in place several years ago. So, it's not all bad news. And I have to say, when it comes to property prices per se, we had a lot of experts predicting Armageddon, house price crashes. They were the headlines that we saw many weeks and months ago. And there's a lot of my colleagues, so-called experts, still saying that we will see a crash. The reality is that the Halifax, the Nationwide, all of the big proper indexes that track these things are showing almost no year-on-year decline in house prices at all.
So no recession, no housing crash, but watch this space. Russell, for the moment, thanks very much indeed for joining us once more on GB News. Well, we were mentioning Sir Keir Starmer there. Well, Labour leader and the Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, been taking part in what have been called roundtable discussions on cancer research today. The latest NHS data has revealed that cancer waiting times in 2022-23, the worst on record. Well, Labour plans to tackle that backlog, including training more doctors and nurses, using spare capacity in the private sector too. Let's hear more now from the former chief of the World Health Organization's cancer programme, Professor Carol Sikora. Professor Sikora, thanks for joining us once more. I guess this is tied in with this awful situation the NHS has found itself in with waiting lists.
It has. Things weren't great before the pandemic, there's no doubt. We weren't competitive compared to Europe. Patients were getting a raw deal in terms of the time to get the diagnosis of cancer. And what the pandemic has done has created a huge backlog. We talk a lot about the 7 million people waiting for something as a waiting list, but there's also a backlog in the diagnosis of cancer, and that's still going on, unfortunately. So, I'd be really interested to see what they come up with. I've got a solution, but it will require quite a lot of effort to implement it. And the only real solution, the only real solution to do it is to clear the backlog by working out of hours, in the evenings, at weekends, and so on. There's no other way it can be done. There's no.
Well, this was one of the suggestions, I think, too, that, get the private sector and the capacity there to actually do NHS work and maybe, as you say, to clear the backlog with around-the-clock effort.
I think, the NHS can work really well. I mean, the vaccine program showed how well it could work. I mean, it came out of nothing, it suddenly happened, and millions of people were vaccinated. Whether that was right or wrong, we can argue about, but that was a logistic that was really handled well. This is the same sort of thing. Can we handle it in the same style? Volunteers in car park, cups of tea for people, all this sort of stuff. Really impressive. And Britain can do that sort of thing well. And yet, obviously it's politics, the Labour Party, Conservative Party, who's coming up with an idea. It's a lot of talk and probably at the end, very little action.
And is this specifically then on the also a problem about the cancer treatments themselves being applied properly?
Once you get started on cancer treatment, there is capacity there. It's slightly less than the rest of Europe. But the biggest difference between us and France and Germany is the time it takes. When you get your first symptoms, you think, I'm coughing up a bit of blood, I might have lung cancer. Getting an appointment to see your GP, getting from your GP to the hospital, and then for the hospital to do the key tests, that takes a lot longer here. In Germany, it takes a week to get all that done. Here, it could take 3 months, and that's the cause of our poorer cancer statistics.
And that could be a vital 3 months. And again, just to sort of look forward, one of the suggestions is perhaps to bypass the GP and have direct access to a cancer specialism unit or a specialist ward, for instance.
That's got to be the way forward. Quite right. I mean, we have an excellent NHS 111 system. I used to chair the East London one, and it works really well. And there's no reason a patient phoning 111 with cancer-like symptoms, following the algorithm they use, could just be sent a CT scan or a biopsy and so on.
And quickly, a thought then on a specific issue. The Christie NHS Foundation Trust in Manchester, a world-leading cancer centre, of course, has been downgraded by the regulator, requiring improvement, they say. I mean, again, indicative of the problems elsewhere?
Absolutely. And the report, I only just read it this morning, I think it's only just came out this morning, was there were cliques forming amongst the staff and some staff were disadvantaged and it wasn't working as a team. And that's the trouble with the NHS at the moment. It's not like when I was a junior doctor, when you're all pulling together, and it doesn't pull together now.
Yeah, what a shame to bring that assessment, but clearly food for thought for the way forward as ever. Professor Carol Sikora, thanks for joining us on GB News. Thank you. More coming up, of course, on that. The controversy, too, of Eurovision. President Zelensky won't be performing, or at least even speaking. Is that the right decision? And the latest, too, from Prince Harry's phone hacking trial. That's coming up in a moment. But first, all the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. It's 12:33. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Passengers are facing widespread disruption across the network today due to the latest round of train strikes. Members of the ASLEF union are walking out at more than a dozen train operators in a long-running dispute over pay. Tomorrow, RMT members go on strike, disrupting travel to the final of the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak says he's disappointed with the decision to block Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky from addressing the Eurovision Song Contest final. The block is due to concerns from organisers that it could politicise the event. Zelensky wanted to urge the global audience to continue supporting his country against Russia's invasion. But the European Broadcasting Union says his request is against the rules. The UK economy grew slightly in the first 3 months of the year, but contracted in March, according to official figures. Growth of 0.1% was recorded by the Office for National Statistics in the first quarter. But in March, the economy shrank by 0.3%, mostly driven by a fall in retail and car sales, as well as ongoing strike action. Royal Mail's chief executive is to step down. Simon Thompson's expected to leave the role in October after around 2.5 years in the job. Last month, Royal Mail agreed a deal with the Communication Workers Union, with staff getting a 10% salary increase and a £500 one-off payment. And Pakistan's ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan is to be released on bail for 2 weeks. The decision from the High Court in Islamabad comes a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest on corruption charges illegal. The events earlier this week have sparked unrest in the country, with almost 2,000 people arrested so far. Imran Khan denies any wrongdoing. TV online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in just a moment. I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Just over 24 hours now to go to the all-singing, all-dancing and perhaps this time all-controversial Eurovision Song Contest final. The UK, of course, hosting this year on behalf of last year's winners, Ukraine. And all that happening in Liverpool. Let's go live there now for the 67th Eurovision to take place and join Richard Salkett, who's Eurovision commentator, joining us. And we say controversy, Richard, because there's been a little bit of this reaction, shall we say, to the fact that Zelensky, who'd wanted to take part, has been denied his chance to perform there.
Yeah, as you say, Mark, not just the temperature and the weather heating up here in Liverpool, but the competition and the controversy around that decision to block President Zelensky of Ukraine taking part or speaking or addressing the millions of viewers who will tune in on Saturday night to watch, as you say, the 67th Eurovision Song Contest. Now, of course, it's ultimately because of politics or the war as to why the contest is being held here in the UK, in Liverpool, on behalf of Ukraine. So, of course, the EBU have said, that's the European Broadcasting Union, have made clear that they always keep politics out of Eurovision. But, of course, many would argue, well, that simply isn't the case by the very nature that the UK has stepped in to help because of the circumstances in Ukraine.
Yeah, and of course, it's the whole fact of Ukrainians celebrating the fact that Liverpool is hosting them, giving them new home as such with this. And I understand that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has described this decision as disappointing. What's been the reaction of people there in Liverpool itself?
Joe, since the opening concert last weekend, there's been a real warmth of feeling towards not just Eurovision, Ukrainians, and sort of wider visitors to the area. Clearly, this is having a significant impact on the city, putting us under a global spotlight, attracting thousands of people to the city here. It's hard to go anywhere without seeing the Eurovision colours, and particularly a lot of love for Ukraine. Wherever you go around here, it's hard to avoid a Ukrainian flag. They're everywhere, which is perhaps a symbol and a testament to how much, and not just the people of Merseyside, but also the UK are taking Ukrainians to their hearts as part of hosting Eurovision here this year.
Yeah, and I think we've now got some more details. Austria's going to open the show with Taya and Selena, Who the Hell is Edgar, about Edgar Allan Poe, no less. And then I think Mae Muller for the UK is actually closing the show. So I'm just wondering, is that good or bad to be the last performer?
Yeah, there's been a lot of online speculation around about the UK's position closing the show, as you say. Could put us in a strong position, fresher in the minds of people watching just before, of course, they give out the all-important numbers to vote. Some controversial entries, perhaps, as you say, this year. Some curious and questionable ones as well. Some, of course, booted out in the semi-finals on Tuesday and, of course, last night as well, with some of the more popular ones not making it through. So it's a tough one to call this year in terms of who will be taking away the trophy on Saturday night.
OK, Richard, with the celebrations about to really kick off in a big way this weekend, thank you for updating us in Liverpool. And let's reflect that our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, has been speaking to some aid workers who've come over from Ukraine to watch the event on Merseyside.
So, Tim, I know you are a volunteer. You brought these guys over here to Liverpool for Eurovision. Tell me what made you want to do that.
So over the past year and a bit now since the war started, I've been volunteering in the cities of Gliwice and Katowice in Poland. These guys are all volunteers across both those cities and Warsaw. Throughout the year, I've been incredibly moved by the just amazing things they're doing. You know, these are phenomenal people. They are literally heroes, and they are the people who we should be welcoming to Liverpool, particularly for Eurovision. I wanted to make it possible for that to happen, because obviously tickets being priced quite high, and the cost of travel, the cost of visas, all those elements make it really almost impossible for the average Ukrainian to attend, just due to the differences in the economy. These people are so special, and I made it my mission. I don't think I quite appreciated just how difficult it would be back in October when I had the idea. Bit of a kind of brainwave when Liverpool was announced as host. Gave Mike Cox, the manager of the Hanover Hotel, a call. So, Mike, have you got any rooms? And he said, for you, of course. So, kind of spawned from there.
Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Ukrainians in good voice there. And just to update you on the position from Downing Street, apparently Rishi Sunak's spokesman said the values and freedoms that President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine are fighting for are not political, they're fundamental, and Eurovision themselves recognised that last year when they rightly suspended Russia's participation from the competition. This is what Downing Street's saying. However, the spokesman going on to say no plans to intervene and ask the European Broadcasting Union to change their mind. Now, it's been day 3 of a trial in which many high-profile celebrities, including Prince Harry, have been accusing Mirror Group newspapers of alleged unlawful information gathering. Well, following the allegations from Prince Harry's lawyer, David Sherborne, stating that systematic and widespread use of private investigators by MGN journalists to unlawfully obtain private information was authorised at senior levels, Piers Morgan, the former editor, has replied by saying he was unaware of phone hacking taking place at the Mirror while he was in charge, stating, "I wouldn't even know how to hack a phone." But the court has been hearing from the MGN's defence lawyer, Andrew Green, Casey. Let's get an update now with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's been following these events at the High Court. And certainly it's kicked off in a big way, Paul, this week.
Yeah, it has. And this is the reason why Rupert Murdoch likes to settle these kind of things out of court, because you get to hear about what happens inside a newspaper and allegations, uncomfortable allegations made. You mentioned Piers Morgan already. His name's cropped up repeatedly via David Sherborne, the lawyer for the claimants, this week. Now, he's finished setting out the opening statement this morning that's taken him 2.5 days, and he's continued along a similar theme. He said that the Mirror Group newspaper legal department knew that unlawful practices were taking place by journalists. There were increasingly concerned emails about vast sums paid to private investigators, and there were board meetings to discuss Mirror Group's liability for it. He adds that evidence of unlawful information gathering from former employee David Brown, who settled an employment tribunal with Mirror Group, was absolutely right, but he says that they would not have settled it if they had not investigated, and that this was a cover-up, plain and simple. He then summed up by asking the judge to look at the totality of the alleged offending and the specific cases of the alleged unlawful information gathering.
And just to remind people, we are expecting Prince Harry to turn up to give evidence, but maybe not for quite a few weeks yet.
Yeah, not until the first week of June. So next week we'll start hearing from a long list of witnesses, including Alistair Campbell, and then in the first week of June we'll hear from Prince Harry. But just to outline Mirror Group's defence, their lawyer Andrew Green this lunchtime, right now in fact, still outlining their defence. He said that Mirror Group newspapers have settled more than 600 claims and paid out more than £100 million in damages and costs. He cited their 2015 case where they admitted phone hacking against a range of high-profile celebrities. He said the publisher fully accepts those findings and that there was no doubt there was reprehensible conduct of the type and scale set out in that judgment. However, he says the 4 claimants in this case are a long way from proving their cases, unlike that in 2015. In 2015, he said there were admissions from Mirror Group newspaper regarding each case, and direct evidence from Dan Evans. He was a former journalist at the newspaper who has since admitted phone hacking. He says that on this occasion, the same guy, Dan Evans, has said that he did not hack any of these 4 high-profile individuals' phone. He says that the evidence in this case is slim in relation to one of the claimants and utterly non-existent for the other 3 claimants, and he describes a deep unreliability and overreach of approach taken by the claimants. So the defence continuing to outline their case, and then, as I say, next week we'll hear from the witnesses.
Yeah.
And of course, at the start of June, one of those will be, and it will be quite a moment, it will be Prince Harry.
Indeed. Paul, as ever, thanks for updating us. As they say, to be continued for several weeks. Thanks very much indeed. Now, day 3 of Northern Ireland's celebrated food and agricultural event of the year, the Balmoral Show, renowned for its sheep shearing, show jumping, thousands attending this year in Lisbon. Let's get the latest now with Doogie Beattie, our reporter, who's been following events there for us. And Doogie, we concentrating yesterday, of course, on the economy and the rural economy and the interest rate hike and so on. But clearly the other aspect is people are there to come together and to enjoy themselves as well.
They are, and they have came in their thousands today. The sun is splitting the trees here, and I'm actually here in a very famous tractor compound that is that of Massey Ferguson. Of course, Harry Ferguson was one of those people that started this very, very well-known tractor company, and his part was exactly this. This is a 3-point linkage on a 1933 Ferguson tractor, and I'll just, Lauren, if you can just go backwards and show us this beautiful tractor in its entirety. I'll take us up to a expert on Harry Ferguson's work, Sam Neal. Sam is, of course, one of the men that promotes Ferguson and exactly what he did. Tell us a little bit about this tractor and Ferguson himself.
Well, Ferguson himself was a late-built son of a farmer, shied away a bit from hard manual work, always was trying to find an easy way of doing things. Left the farm Joe at mechanical work and cars originally. Then he got a job with the government of Ireland demonstrating tractors and ploughs. At that time, ploughs were all towed by a chain behind the tractors, and there's a certain element of danger if the plough caught a rock or a root. The tractor would have reared up, come back over and killed the man. So Ferguson set about to try and incorporate the plough as a part of the tractor. And he started off with a converted Eros Ford car. And he worked on from there, and eventually built it onto a Fordson Model F tractor. And that was reasonably successful, but he wasn't happy that it wasn't selling in good numbers, and he wanted to build his own tractor. So he set out in Belfast with a team, Archie Greer and Willie Sands, and to build the prototype black tractor.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
The rest is history.
Well, there you go. Necessity is the part of invention, and we've been talking about the price of food. These tractors were made because there was a real need for food in the 30s and 40s, and now it appears that we're actually going backwards on our farming and trying to stop so much farming. These machines were made right in the heart of when they needed food, and they put a lot by food security. This was 1933, of course. In 45 or 1939 to 45, we were in a totally different place with food security.
And another couple of examples behind you, I think even up to the 1960s. And of course, I seem to remember the great thing was you could repair a Ferguson with just one multi-tool, one spanner that fitted everything on the tractor. Great idea.
Right, indeed. And in fact, actually, this one here, this TE20 here, I actually have in my own yard. It was my grandfather's, and it is very similar to this. Unfortunately, Mark, it's not in as pristine.
We just lost the signal, but we got the story at least, and it's in the correct colour there as well. But do keep updating us there at the Balmoral show. Well, of course, we were talking to him yesterday about the economy at the rural end of things, but with inflation soaring and interest rates creeping up, of course, yesterday, many wondering what's being being done to help households with their rising fuel costs and energy costs. The government focused on cutting those prices in the long run. Nuclear power high on the agenda for that. Well, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan has been to Britain's newest nuclear plant at Hinkley Point to take a look for us.
Europe's biggest building site, Hinkley Point will be Britain's first new nuclear power plant for 3 decades. Already 6 years under construction, this mega project on the Somerset coast needs 1 million tonnes of nuclear-grade concrete and 230 tonnes of Welsh steel. Around 10,000 workers are employed here, with 60,000 more involved across the country. With the first of 2 nuclear reactors already delivered, this huge atomic power station is due to open in 2027.
Hinkley Point will eventually provide enough power for 6 million homes, 9% of the UK's total electricity. The cost is about £26 billion. That's about half the annual defence budget.
On a recent visit, Grant Shapps was keen to highlight that Hinkley Point is providing thousands of much-needed apprenticeships. I asked the Energy Secretary how building a nuclear power station fits into the government's net zero vision of green energy.
We have the world's largest offshore wind farm in the North Sea, and the second largest, and the third largest, and we're building the fourth. There are areas that we really lead in, but we need nuclear as well, because if the sun isn't shining, and you're not getting solar, and the wind isn't blowing, you're not getting wind, you need that base load of nuclear as well.
But is Shapps comfortable about the big cost overruns at Hinkley, or that it's being built by EDF, a French state-owned company, using billions of pounds provided by the Chinese government?
The Chinese have an investment which is historic in this particular development, but primarily, as you say, it's an EDF French and therefore French government, because they're now state-owned, and therefore French taxpayer problem.
Despite the boost to jobs in the local economy, some campaign groups oppose the construction of Hinkley Point. They say cost overruns will spark higher household energy bills, while highlighting the environmental costs of disposing of nuclear waste.
The highly radioactive nuclear waste from Hinkley C has to be stored on site in its highly radioactive state for 60 years. It's 60 years before they can move a gram of it to the geological disposal facility, which, will somehow, somewhere be constructed in time for that.
Whether it opens in 2027 or later, this new nuclear plant will remain controversial. But as oil and gas use recedes, atomic energy will likely play an increasing role in powering our nation. Liam Halligan, GB News, at Hinkley Point.
You're watching GB News Live. We're back at the top of the hour. All the latest on the rail strike. Britain off the rails again. Who's to blame? We'll be finding out why we haven't got a ticket to ride. And, of course, the latest from Liverpool as we head towards Eurovision. That's coming up for you the next hour. Stay with us.
Hello, it's Aidan McGibbon here with the GB News forecast from the Met Office. A lot of cloud today. Rain for some, but nowhere near as much rain as we've seen during the last few days. For many, actually, it is a dry day because we've got higher pressure moving in just in time for the weekend. A few exceptions to the mainly settled theme, the main one being an occluded front pushing into the southeast, which is going to bring some patchy rain and drizzle through the day, a damp feel and a lot of low cloud. That low cloud extends across much of eastern Scotland into eastern and central England. And with the cold wind from the North Sea, it's going to feel quite miserable, I think, 11 or 12 Celsius on the North Sea coast. A complete contrast to the west, where temperatures will reach the high teens with some decent sunny spells shining through. 1 or 2 showers possible for Wales and the southwest during the afternoon. But they'll be very isolated. They'll disappear into the evening. And then for most, it's a dry night, but there will be this extensive low cloud creeping west across the UK, affecting eastern Scotland, eastern and central England, as far as East Wales. Temperatures around the mid to high single figures. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, here it's going to be colder because we've got clearer skies, a few mist and fog patches to start things, and certainly quite misty around coasts of Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, and more especially the North Sea coast. Now, the low cloud inland will take some time to lift and break, but sure enough, by the afternoon, for many places, it's looking fine, with some decent sunny spells coming through. Long spells of sunshine for northern England, much of Scotland, Wales and the south, but it's staying misty and cloudy on the North Sea coast and just inland. And it's going to feel cold here, whilst where we've got the sunshine elsewhere, high teens, even low 20s possible. Into the evening then, and an area of rain pushes into the far northwest. That will affect Scotland and Northern Ireland on Sunday, and it will turn showery as it pushes across England and Wales on Monday.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 1 o'clock. A very good afternoon. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Friday afternoon. Off the rails again. Tens of thousands of commuters are hit once again as the Train Drivers Union ASLEF stages its latest walkout, and they'll be joined tomorrow by the RMT with industrial action that could hit those trying to get to Eurovision in Liverpool. No ticket to ride tomorrow, it seems. UK's economy growing over the first quarter of the year, but only just. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says it's good news. Labour's Sir Keir Starmer says it's nothing to celebrate. Who's right? And net migration in the UK could be as high as 1 million, despite the government's pledge back in 2019 to bring the figures down. Is it another broken promise? And Liverpool, of course, tuning up for Eurovision, but has a sour note been hit with the ban on President Zelensky joining in? The Prime Minister says he should have been allowed to speak. Well, that coming up in a moment. First, the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Passengers are facing widespread disruption today due to the latest round of train strikes. Members of the ASLEF union are walking out at more than a dozen train operators in a long-running dispute over pay. Tomorrow, RMT members go on strike on the day of the Eurovision Song Contest final in Liverpool. Further strikes by the union will be held on May the 31st and June the 3rd, the day of the FA Cup final at Wembley. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman told GB News the strikes are disappointing.
We have been able to facilitate an offer which has been put to the union leaders. The problem we've got is that they won't put it forward to their members. Similar offers have been put forward to other members of unions and they've accepted them. So logic would dictate if the union leaders did the same, we could see an end to this action. And I'm really sorry for all passengers who have been disrupted today.
The Prime Minister says he's disappointed with the decision to block the Ukrainian president from making an address at the Eurovision Song Contest tomorrow. The block is due to concerns from organisers it could politicise the event. Zelensky wanted to urge the audience to continue supporting his country against Russia's invasion. The European Broadcasting Union says his request is against the rules. The UK economy grew slightly in the first 3 months of the year, but contracted in March, according to official figures. Growth of 0.1% was recorded by the Office for National Statistics in the first quarter, but in March, the economy shrank by 0.3%, mostly driven by a fall in retail and car sales, as well as ongoing strike action. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says although the slight growth is a positive step, there's more work to be done.
Well, these are much better figures than anyone would possibly have predicted, even 3 months ago. And that's partly because of what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday, measures in the budget that are helping to help companies to recruit, tackle some of the underlying problems in the economy. But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, meanwhile, says it's simply not good enough.
Well, this is nothing to celebrate, and it's yet more low growth on the back of 13 years of low growth. And I think the essential question many people today will be asking themselves is, do I feel any better off now than I did 13 years ago when this government started? And I think the resounding answer to that around the country will be no, I don't.
The Archbishop of Canterbury has been convicted of speeding in London. Justin Welby was ordered to pay £510 and given 3 points on his licence for exceeding a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit last October. The hearing was held on the same day he made a rare intervention in the House of Lords, condemning the government's plans to tackle the small boats crisis as morally unacceptable. A Lambeth Palace spokesperson says the Archbishop was aware of the speeding offence but hadn't been notified it had gone to court. Excuse me. Royal Mail's chief executive is to step down. Simon Thompson will leave the role in October after 2 years in the job. The announcement comes just weeks after agreeing a deal with the Communication Workers Union, bringing an end to a year of postal strikes. He says it's the right time to hand over to a new CEO. Pakistan's ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan is to be released on bail for 2 weeks. The decision from the High Court in Islamabad comes a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest on corruption charges illegal. The events earlier this week have sparked unrest in the country, with almost 2,000 people arrested so far. Imran Khan denies any wrongdoing. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. Now, we've got a situation where Britain seems to be off the rails for many parts of the network once again. Passengers facing widespread disruption at least 12 train operating companies, with strikes across the country. Members of ASLIF, the drivers' union, have walked out at this long-running dispute over pay and conditions too, and then tomorrow the RMT members will go on strike. That's, of course, the day of the Eurovision Song Contest final in Liverpool. Well, the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, speaking to GB News earlier, said this on the timing of this particular strike.
With a weekend coming up with Eurovision, the FA Cup final, it feels like events have been targeted deliberately to really impact people the most, and it's really regrettable on Eurovision, which we're hosting for our friends in Ukraine. And it's not good enough for them to say they didn't realise that the events were on, which is what we've been hearing this morning from Mick Whelan, because either he doesn't have a very good sporting and cultural diary, or once he was told, he could have changed the dates so they didn't impact. I mean, Eurovision is a great celebration. We should be really proud to host that.
Well, the Rail Minister there outlining the government's position. In terms of Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, he had this to say in reaction.
These rail strikes have been going on for a very long time now. And I don't want to see them continuing. I think the only way to end them is for the government to get into a room, negotiate and settle this dispute. It's been going on a very, very long time. The underlying causes are the fact that many people working in the railways feel their living standards haven't improved over many, many years. Costs are going through the roof. The government's got to stop sitting on its hands, get around the table and sort this one out.
Well, in terms of the union, the leader of the ASLEF union, Mick Whelan, said that pay negotiations with ministers had stalled over the past 4 months, which is why the fresh strikes were taking place. The General Secretary saying the union has seen neither hide nor hair from the government since the beginning of the year, with one token meeting on January the 6th, saying that the government talked a good game but weren't actually engaging, saying his member did not want to be on strike but felt they had no choice in a bid to find a resolution, and describing the UK government payoff of 4% as risible. Well, of course, we do have picket lines across many stations. We'll update you with the position across the country a little later on. But let's also reflect on the latest economic figures showing that our economy grew, but by only 0.1% for the first 3 months of this year. For March alone, however, it contracted by 0.3%. That's been driven by a poor performance by the services sector. Sir Keir Starmer saying it was nothing to celebrate. But this is what the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt had to say earlier.
Well, these are much better figures than anyone would possibly have predicted, even 3 months ago. And that's partly because of what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday, measures in the budget that are helping to help companies to recruit, tackle some of the underlying problems in the economy. But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
Well, will the economy be motoring? Let's join now economist Julian Jessup, who can run his slide rule over this. Julian, just looking at the figures themselves, we actually had not a bad situation in January, I think, looking at obviously a bit of a Christmas boost, flatlining in then February and falling back, contraction in March.
I know, it's quite extraordinary also. It's the first time I've heard what Jeremy Hunt said just a few moments ago about the GDP numbers, attributing the better-than-expected growth to measures announced in the budget in March. But as you said, in March itself, the economy shrank 0.3%. So it's rather hard to see how that squares. As it happens, I think that the weakness in March can be downplayed. It was partly the bad weather, partly the impact of strikes. I think underlying growth is a bit stronger. But the fact that the economy still eked out growth of only 0.1% in the first quarter is frankly still pretty pathetic. I mean, yes, OK, it's growth, it's a positive number, but that's a very low hurdle to clear. I think we should be aiming for something much better than this.
Yeah, and in terms of aiming where we will go, we did have the Bank of England forecast, of course, indicating it believed perhaps that we'd be 2.25% higher at the end of this 3-year forecast period, that things would really start to tick up. I mean, no sign of it as yet.
Well, if I'm trying to be positive, then I would say that the economy has been performing better than most people anticipated. So, if you look at the numbers prepared for the March budget by the Office of Budget Responsibility, they did actually predict that the economy would contract by 0.4% in the first quarter. So they're already out by 0.5%, just 3 months into the year. I'm pretty confident this year will be a year of upward revisions to forecasts. So the Bank of England has already revised their numbers up. I'm sure the OBR will. And also the IMF and the OECD numbers for the UK are looking basically implausibly weak as well. So relative to expectations, yes, a bit better than expected. But, after a decade or so where productivity growth in particular has been very, very sluggish, we should be doing much better than this. We need strong pro-growth policies. And at the moment, people seem happy with sort of managed decline and just ticking along.
Yeah, which is Sir Keir Starmer's point, more low growth on the back of 13 years of low growth. But for us non-economists who might be puzzled by this push-me-pull-you approach that, the worry about growth in the economy, and yet we have the Bank of England increasing interest rates yet again to slow down the economy.
Well, remember that the Bank of England's job is to worry about inflation. Ironically, the fact that growth is a bit stronger probably made it a bit more willing to raise interest rates again. Its sort of worldview is that you need a recession or at least slower economic growth to bring inflation back under control. I personally think the Bank of England made a mistake in raising rates again this week. Monetary policy is rather like boiling a frog. You don't realise that you've done too much until perhaps it's a little bit too late. And the bank has already raised interest rates a lot, and it's done other things. It's turned off the tap of money printing as well. So I think there is a danger that even one or two small increases could be enough now to tip the economy over. But on balance, I don't think that will happen. And in particular, I was encouraged this week that the banks seem to be hinting that that's it. There will be two more sets of inflation and labour market data before the next meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee. And I think as long as they show inflation falling, as I think they will, then the bank can now afford to remain on hold. And I think that will be a big relief to mortgage holders in particular.
Yeah, because we reflect there were two members of the Monetary Policy Committee who decided to keep it on hold this time.
And I think they're right. I would have been in that camp as well. And the main point that they were making is basically what I'm saying, that there's already been big increases in interest rates. It takes a while for those to affect the economy. And as far as the inflation numbers are concerned, yes, the numbers are high at the moment, but central banks should be forward-looking. And there are good reasons to think that food and energy price inflation in particular are now going to fall sharply.
OK, thank you as ever, Julian, for bringing us your assessment of the latest figures. But let's reflect, of course, that Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, was talking about persistent or sticky, I think was the phrase he used, food inflation. So what does it mean for those of us trying to put food on the table? Let's speak now to the Director of Policy at the Trussell Trust, the charity running the UK's largest network of food banks. Helen Barnard can join us. Helen, thank you for your time. I mean, just to put the two things together, the interest rate rise yesterday and this anemic growth, I mean, it's still a not very encouraging picture, is it?
It is. I mean, we're obviously in the doldrums. I think what is really worrying, though, is a couple of weeks ago, we released our end-of-year statistics, and we said in the last year, we provided a record high 3 million emergency food parcels to people and more than 1 million to children. And that's incredibly worrying. That's more than double from 5 years ago. But prices are still going up. And as you said, food inflation is actually far higher than even the headline inflation. So more and more people are finding they just can't afford the essentials. They can't afford to put food on the table, to keep the lights on. And people are racking up debt to try and keep up with these costs, which then adds to their future hardship because they're then trying to pay back unaffordable debt.
Where are you on this suggestion that perhaps the food or the supermarket sector may have been indulging in what I think was called greedflation? Certainly Sir Ed Davey, Liberal Democrats, wants the Competitions and Markets Authority to look into that to see if there has been any kind of price fixing, for instance.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of debate about, there will be a probe into that. I mean, I should say a lot of the supermarkets are providing immense amounts of support through charities like us. But actually, to be honest, from our point of view, the core problem is people do not have an income that will keep up with essentials. And the biggest driver, to be honest, is the social security system, because it's not fit for purpose. And even when we help people to get the benefits they should be getting, more and more, that just doesn't cover the cost of essentials. And that is a long-term problem. That's not something that's arisen this year or last year. It's something that we've allowed to happen for years. And we need a reset to say that, if social security should protect people from extreme hardship. It's a basic protection in our society that isn't working. So that's where I think the focus should be.
And I guess that means the pressure is on the voluntary sector, particularly the food banks, the churches, all those charity groups.
It is. We are just seeing people who are just facing this kind of tidal wave of people in need of support. And it's been going on a really long time. So we had the pandemic, we've had the cost of living crisis, and it just keeps getting worse for people. So when you talk to volunteers, they are exhausted and they're angry, actually, that this keeps being driven up and up and up, and we're not seeing the action that would actually free people from the need of turning to charity for the basics of life, because that's not right. It's not something anybody should have to do.
Helen, thank you very much indeed for that. And let's just actually update people that we're being told the boss of Tesco has received a £4.4 million pay packet for the past year. But the pay for Chief Executive Officer Ken Murphy, less than the £4.75 million he was paid a year earlier. The supermarket giant's annual report out showing how much it's been giving to its top workers. His pay, 197 times that of the average Tesco worker, according to the report. That buys a lot of supermarket goods, doesn't it? Anyway, coming up, we'll be running through some more figures, the shocking predictions that migration could top 1 million by the end of the year. We'll hear from a political commentator and see whether that is good or bad for the economy.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News Live. So those passengers facing widespread disruption today across the rail network because of the latest strike, members of ASLEF, the drivers' union, having walked out. So let's take us up to Scotland and join our Scotland reporter Tony Maguire, who's at Glasgow with an ASLEF picket line there, and also our national reporter Theo Chikombo, who is in Worcester in the Midlands. First, Tony, to you, what have the ASLEF members been saying there? Because certainly the General Secretary, Mick Whelan, has talked about this growing frustration with the fact that the government's not engaging in discussions with them.
Yeah, well, certainly Kevin in Scotland, he wasn't saying very much to me, but certainly the feeling on the picket line today was that they're just not being listened to. This has been a long 11-month dispute with all the train drivers, and ASLEF taking their turn today with Avanti West Coast trains no longer running today between Scotland, which usually services England, and Northern Wales. Now, certainly the mood seemed jovial in the picket line, but this is the longest. He said, she said, as the government, the unions and train drivers try and work out some kind of middle grounds to bring this dispute to an end. But of course, the real people who are caught in the middle are the commuters and the public. I spoke to one woman, Brenda. She was supposed to go down to her sister's this weekend for a long organised trip, and unfortunately that looks like it's not going to happen. I think we've got a clip of Brenda that we can show now.
We got to the station, my niece looked at the times and it says all of a sudden come up, cancel, 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 cancel. So we went to the ticket office. There's not a thing they can do, not a thing they can do. We could maybe get a bus tomorrow to take us to Carlisle, but we're no guaranteed anything after that.
Now, there's 16 rail networks who are taking action today, and of course RMT causing members of the public further disruption tomorrow. Certainly the public are going to find it really hard up in Scotland to get it down to Liverpool. There is some sort of express train service are operating between Manchester Airport and Liverpool Lime Street, but otherwise for Eurovision fans up in Scotland, they're going to have to find another way shake their stuff down in Liverpool at Eurovision tomorrow.
OK, we've got a delay on our line as well there in Glasgow, but we've got the gist of it. Tony, thank you for that. So let's head down to Worcester and join Theo. And Theo, what have the passengers there been making of this?
It's a similar picture, really, as we've heard from Tony there in Scotland. Most people have decided not to come to the station here. It's fairly quiet, but you can probably see over my right shoulder, we've got some of those union members, and they've been saying, some of them have been saying it's not all about pay, but it's also about how the government need to take a real step forward when it comes to the price for what they've described as incompetence across the country, but also the conditions that some of these workers are having to adhere by. They say they haven't received a pay increase since 2019, and we know there's a cost of living crisis which many are going through in this country. And they're saying their rail bosses have had huge pay rises, for example, taking them back several years, which is around £3 billion. And of course, workers, they say they haven't had the privilege of receiving such finances. But for now, many more people, I've been told by some of those who are here, will be joining the picket line throughout the afternoon to relay that message and get those in power to understand what the situation is. But of course, passengers are the ones who are facing the real delay today and having to use the roads instead.
And indeed, no indication of negotiations yet, and the RMT taking action tomorrow, of course. Theo, thank you for that in Worcester. We'll keep you updated, of course, throughout the day. Right, let's talk about the government's pledge, remember, back in 2019 to bring net migration down. Well, the Home Office now reportedly concerned that the figure could actually top 1 million by the end of this year. Analysis by migration experts suggesting the figure could reach 997,000 when the figures are published in a couple of weeks' time. That would smash last year's total of 504,000. The surge being largely fueled, we're told, by non-EU migrants entering the country to work, to study or flee conflict. Let's get reaction now by Benjamin Lochane, who's a political commentator. Benjamin, we should add, of course, these are not official statistics as yet. They're expectations, and it could actually be lower to 660,000, some reports suggest, but still obviously uncomfortable for the government.
Yeah, well, materially, it's no real difference, be it 1 million or 650 or whatever else. The fact is, for far too long, the numbers have been far too high on migration. It's not a situation of we don't want people to come here. It's a situation of we don't have the housing, we don't have the public services. We can't facilitate an increase in population at that rate, whilst we're also seeing a decline in our living standards and quality of life. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we are allowing this to continue. And we've had a Conservative party, a Conservative government for 13 years now. For the past few years, they've had an 80-seat majority. Why haven't they done anything about this? And I saw the headline said, Home Office warns that these figures could get up to 1 million. It's almost as though, you know, what if there was a department whose job it was to actually deal with that? Oh, yes, it's the Home Office. So why aren't they doing it?
Yeah, just to reflect, Sir Keir Starmer saying the government, in his view, completely lost control. We need managed approach, and we haven't got that. So it's not just the far right, if you like, taking issue with this. However, when one digs down, there is an interesting aspect that a lot of these people coming in are actually students, and therefore there may actually be a net gain to the economy if they're paying student fees to the various institutions.
Well, not necessarily, because, you know, one of the problems with the student visas is that a lot of the places which issue them aren't necessarily great universities. There's a lot of abuse with student visas, where you have certain sort of schools like language schools or some sort of other, you know, specialist thing, where these people are actually coming over here to work on a student visa. So that ends up being sort of an avenue for people to fraudulently enter the country and stay here under the guise of being students. So that's one area where the Home Office really need to crack down on the sheer number of student visas that are being issued.
Yeah, I think that the latest figure up to December 2022 was 135,788 of these such visas being issued to family members of the students themselves.
Yes, which is absolutely bizarre. I mean, you know, if you come here to settle and work and you bring your family, that's one thing. But if you're a student and you're coming over for a couple of years, you don't really need to bring your whole family with you. And that's the problem I'm talking about when you have these student visas being issued to people who are very clearly not actually legitimate students coming here in good faith to do a 3-year degree and then go home. These are people who are using it as an avenue to get in, bring their whole family in, and effectively game the system. So, you know, this is one of the problems with the approach we have. But going back to my original point, the real issue isn't so much the amount of people, it's the fact that we cannot cater for the increase in population in terms of our public services, in terms of housing, in terms of schools, in terms of, you know, every area. I mean, the NHS at the moment can barely support the existing population. What happens when you inject another 1 million people into that, relying on that system, without actually making any changes to the NHS to facilitate it?
There is a reflection that some of these people coming in from non-EU countries may actually be helping to staff the NHS and therefore helping in terms of the overall situation.
Yes, that's one argument. However, I would say a lot of the people leaving the country are people who we've trained in this country as doctors, as nurses, as, you know, medical professionals, and they're going abroad because the conditions and the pay in the NHS are not good enough, and they end up going to places like Switzerland or Australia or you know, wherever else they get better conditions and better pay. So we invest huge amounts of money into training these people up. They then go abroad, and we bring people in with a potentially inferior quality of education or healthcare, which is not the standard that we train people up to in this country, and replace the people that are leaving with people who come in. How about, instead of that, we incentivise people who are trained here to stay here. We bring back things like the nursing bursaries. We don't require nurses to have degrees, which I think is a silly idea. We don't laden them with debt, and we pay them properly. We give them proper working conditions, and then we wouldn't need to rely on mass unfettered immigration in order to fund and staff the NHS.
OK, Benjamin, thank you very much indeed. But as we say, no official figures as yet. They're to come in a couple of weeks' time, but we'll update you as they come through. Coming up in this next half hour, we'll be reflecting on a certain Rishi Sunak saying that President Zelensky should be at Eurovision, and also a certain Boris Johnson thinks that it's right that the Ukrainian president should have been allowed not to perform, but just to speak to everyone at Eurovision ahead, of course, of us hosting it on behalf of Ukraine in Liverpool. More reaction coming up to that in a moment. First, let's get latest headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. It's 1:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Passengers are facing widespread disruption across the network today due to the latest round of train strikes. Members of the ASLEF union are walking out at more than a dozen train operators in a long-running dispute over pay. Tomorrow, RMT members go on strike, disrupting travel to the final of the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool. And as we've been hearing, Rishi Sunak says he's disappointed with the decision to block Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky from addressing the Eurovision Song Contest. Boris Johnson's also expressed his disappointment, tweeting, "There's only one reason the contest isn't in Ukraine, and that's because of Putin's illegal war." He's since deleted that tweet. The block is due to concerns from organisers that an address could politicise the event. The European Broadcasting Union says it's against the rules. The UK economy grew slightly in the first 3 months of the year, but contracted in March, according to official figures. Growth of 0.1% was recorded by the Office for National Statistics in the first quarter, but in March, the economy shrank by 0.3%, mostly driven by a fall in retail and car sales, as well as ongoing strike action. Royal Mail's chief executive is to step down. Simon Thompson will leave the role in October after 2 years in the job. The announcement comes just weeks after agreeing a deal with the Communication Workers Union, bringing an end to a year of postal strikes. He says it's the right time to hand over to a new CEO. And Pakistan's ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan is to be released on bail for 2 weeks. The decision from the High Court in Islamabad comes a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest on corruption charges illegal. The events earlier this week have sparked unrest in the country, with almost 2,000 people arrested so far. Imran Khan denies any wrongdoing. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2515 and €1.1489. The price of gold is £1,601.53 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,742 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Live. Let's bring you some results already in on Eurovision, not for the contestants, but this whole issue of whether President Zelensky should be able to speak to that event, of course, being hosted on behalf of Ukraine by Liverpool, with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and now Boris Johnson has said they're disappointed that President Zelensky has been blocked from addressing the Eurovision final tomorrow night, that decision taken by the European Broadcasting Union. Boris Johnson tweeting, "There's only one reason the contest isn't in Ukraine, and that's because of Putin's illegal war," although he's since deleted that tweet. Well, the Ukrainian leader, we're told, had wanted to appear by video link during the final in Liverpool tomorrow night, but the EBU saying his request was against its rules. Let's speak now to political commentator Jacob Reynolds, who can join us now. And of course, we do reflect, Jacob, that the whole issue of it being in Liverpool is in itself political, I guess.
Well, yes, of course, the first thing to say is that Eurovision is, of course, political. So the idea that it can't be a political event is slightly suspect. And we know that, I mean, the whole reason Ukraine won last year is because, A, they had a good song, but B, they won a significant expression of solidarity from people because of Russia's outrageous aggression and Ukraine's heroic resistance. But, I mean, at the same time, Zelensky does need to be a little bit careful here. I think there's a danger that he comes across perhaps almost a bit sport or entitled. I think Ukraine's performers would have done a much better case of kind of making the case for Ukraine through their performance, rather than Zelensky kind of feeling that he has to be there to address the event.
Yeah. However, I'm looking at what the Prime Minister's official spokesman said a little earlier in Downing Street. The values and freedoms that President Zelensky and the people of Ukraine are fighting for are not political, they're fundamental. And Eurovision themselves recognised that last year when they were rightly suspended Russia's participation from the competition. So the EBU has already taken that political decision to suspend Russia from partaking. So it doesn't quite tally this time round, does it?
Well, yes, so that's what I say. Eurovision is, of course, political. And so, the decision to exclude Russia, the fact that Ukraine won, these are all political events in their own right. But the thing I'm more concerned about here is how it kind of comes across from Zelensky. I think most people watching the event will be kind of cheering on the Ukrainian performers alongside the English ones and whatever other kind of national identities you might have. But that case is kind of best made through the performance and, in fact, by what goes on in military matters as well. So we saw last night that even the merest hint of a counter-offensive from Ukraine was causing all kinds of panic amongst pro-Russian commentators. So they make their case far better on the battlefield than they do kind of trying to politicize Eurovision.
And of course, I guess there is always the opportunity for Ukraine to be voted as winners of Eurovision, despite how bad or good their performance is and so on. And that in itself would be a political decision, I guess.
Well, yes, the voting for Eurovision is always a mixture of whether you like the song and whether you kind of want to show expression of support for that country. There's always been this kind of thing around Eurovision. And as I say, if people want to show their support for Ukraine, like you say, they can vote for it. Ukraine's performers can make the case for Ukraine through their performance. And people can, broadly speaking, enjoy the show, but know that it should have been held in Ukraine because that there who won last year and the fact that it can't be held there is due to Russia's outrageous aggression.
OK, lastly, a most important question. Are you going to watch it? Are you Eurovision fan, rather?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's become more and more popular over the years. And so, yeah, I'll be tuning in. I'll be cheering on the English performance and, of course, the Ukrainian one too.
OK, Jacob, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your reaction. And I think May is actually performing last, we're being told. So that may be good or bad, who knows. But certainly we'll be updating you from Liverpool throughout the day as the excitement mounts. Now, let's talk about Labour. The Labour Party under scrutiny, we're told, after the Met Police announced they'll not investigate a claim of sexual assault against a shadow minister. The case has been dropped reportedly at the victim's request. But it's led to many alleged it's a prime example of a culture of fear that may be at play in Westminster. Also comes as Sir Keir Starmer meets medical leaders today to discuss Labour's cancer care plans, training more doctors and nurses, reforming the NHS for early diagnosis intervention. But let's bring in Olivia Utley, our political reporter in the studio, first to discuss what I guess the paper may say Labour sex scandal. What's been going on?
Yeah, well, it is getting a little bit awkward for Keir Starmer, really, because there are 3 separate cases that are going on at the moment, all at various different stages. We had the Labour very senior aide to a frontbench shadow minister who quit his job last night after it emerged that this complaint had been made against him by an intern 20 years his junior. It took the Labour Party 3 years to investigate the complaint. It was dropped once, the investigation. She then complained again. They said that, yes, there was merit to her complaint. Right. He was asked to write a formal written apology, which he did, but it was taken no further. Anyway, in the end, there was such a furore that he felt that he had to quit, which doesn't speak very, isn't particularly indicative of good performance of Labour's internal complaints system, which was introduced only last year.
Although we reflect, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer's has been speaking to reporters saying sexual harassment allegations are taken extremely seriously by his party following this report of the internal investigation. First time he's been questioned by reporters on it. Clearly, you know, he's aware of what the political damage could be on this.
He is, absolutely. And just as this drama with this senior aid was coming to an end last night, there was this new case, which you mentioned there in your opening, of a Labour frontbench shadow minister who was the subject of a complaint from another Labour MP saying that he had sexually assaulted her, and she said that she complained to the Independent Investigations Board but was persuaded, not by them but by other members of the party, to drop her complaint given his popularity in the party. Now that's what Tortoise Media were reporting yesterday. Today it seems that she has dropped her complaint, but again, it raises important questions about how Labour's internal complaints procedure is working. This procedure was only introduced at the beginning of this year as a result of the Watchdog's anti-Semitism report on how internal complaints have been handled in the past. And it doesn't seem like the new system is working.
No, I mean, Labour's saying it had followed the recommendations on this made by an independent panel, defending its complaints process as robust and following best practice. And, of course, we reflect Sir Keir's experience in the legal sphere. It makes it even more difficult for him.
Absolutely. It makes it really awkward for him because what it seems has happened is that, yes, once the independence procedure is up and running, perhaps it does work as it's supposed to work, but it seems that people in the party, perhaps not officially, but behind closed doors, have been advised not to complain about certain people. In the case of this Labour MP, this shadow minister is apparently so popular in the party that she was advised not to complain. Now, of course, course, at the same time, we've got Nick Brown, the Labour chief whip, the longest-serving chief whip, a veteran Labour MP, who's now been suspended for 7 months over a complaint which the media are still none the wiser about. It hasn't emerged.
And I think Nick Brown at one stage himself said he was none the wiser on what was being alleged as well. And we should add that in terms of this other investigation, neither MP has been named for legal reasons. I mean, obviously there is a sensitivity about that as well.
Well, absolutely, and perhaps more details about this case will emerge, although it is possible now that they won't if the victim has genuinely chosen to drop this complaint. But one way or another, all of these stories coming at the same time is beginning to look as though Labour's internal complaints procedure isn't quite up to scratch.
And just to reflect the political damage, they were wanting to get this message out about cancer care today and how Labour would sort of address the whole issue of the delay in getting cancer care and assessment and so on. You know, that's gone out the window now. Everyone's talking about this internal row.
Absolutely. And Wes Streeting, who has been very vocal, actually, on reforming the NHS, he's taken a line which no previous Labour shadow health secretary has taken, that yes, the NHS isn't working and it does need to be reformed. And he was saying today, actually, that Labour's cancer plan would include using up some private capacity for the NHS to help clear the backlogs. Now, that's quite a radical proposal from a Labour shadow health secretary. But as you say, it isn't getting the airtime that Labour was hoping because these sexual harassment complaints are swirling around and taking up the airtime.
I'll see what the Sunday papers, of course, make of it as well. Olivia, thank you very much indeed for updating us on that. Now, talking of updating you, of course, you remember earlier in the week we were talking about the situation in the southwest of England with flash flooding, some areas seeing more than 2 weeks of rain in just the space of a few hours. Somerset and Devon the worst affected, and as a result there was a major incident declared. Quite extraordinary pictures there with torrents of water. Well, let's catch up once more with Jeff Moody, our southwest of England reporter at Ven Ottery in Devon. Well, still plenty of water there, Jeff, and I guess it's, as we were discussing last time, it's not just the water, it's all the sediment, the mud and all the muck that sort of comes through as well and hits these areas.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've been speaking to some of the homeowners here in Ven Ottery who are really distressed and really shocked that they're still, 3 days later, they're still knee-deep in mud, they're knee-deep in silt and goodness knows what else. And they're trying desperately to make their homes secure, to make their homes clean again. It's almost unbelievable on a beautiful day like today that only on Tuesday the most unexpected and torrential storm hit the southwest of England. This particular hamlet, Ven Ottery, was totally immersed in many feet of rainwater that only really began to clear yesterday. Well, earlier on I was speaking to the owner of the Bow Hayes Trees Nursery, who was very much involved in the effort over the last couple of days to try and clean out people's homes. He said that the floods were completely unexpected.
There was no warning. I don't know what stage that's at the moment. There was a test a few weeks ago. It worked on my phone, didn't work on everybody's phone. I believe that it was for events that were to preserve life, just in case there was a risk to life. This could have been a lot worse. Whether or not flooding is on that list, I would have thought so, but no, there was no warning whatsoever.
He's talking there about this government system that was in place a couple of weeks ago, whereby everybody received an emergency text, and the idea was that that text could be used in case of flooding. Well, it could have been used on Tuesday. It could have saved an awful lot of damage, but nobody received any warning whatsoever. So today there's a sense of bitterness, there's a sense of anger too, that this could really have been avoided if people had only been warned it was coming.
And an indication, perhaps, that obviously, you know, with the weather forecast, there could still be a few problems on the way, with bearing in mind that the ground's going to be saturated there at the moment.
Well, yes, absolutely, because we're expecting a lot of rain next week as well. The forecast for next week doesn't look particularly pleasant as well. But in places, because the ground has been so dry and baked after the heat wave that we received last summer, the water in places just isn't really going anywhere. The ground isn't as porous as it normally is, and despite all of these deluges that we've been experiencing during the course of the winter, they've extended the hosepipe ban further into the rest of Cornwall and to parts of Devon too. So there's no getting away from it at the moment.
No, indeed. Yes, one can imagine what the reaction's been there to that locally. Jeff, thank you very much indeed for updating us there, and we'll see how people are coping, of course, and keep you updated. Now, new sensitivity guides telling prison guards not to call inmates convicts in order to avoid offending them. Prison staff also being advised not to refer to former prisoners as ex-cons, but refer to them instead as persons with lived experience, or prison leavers. The prison service drawing up that list because of the large number of people in jail on remand who have not been convicted of a crime. Let's speak now to Mark Johnson, a former prisoner, if I'm allowed to use that term, and founder of Use a Voice, a charity that works to reduce reoffending. Mark, thanks very much indeed. I don't know how you feel about being called a person with lived experience.
Well, I actually have been in the vanguard of literally creating that as a sort of not as adopted language, but really the usefulness of how, once you've come through the criminal justice system, how your experience can be used to design better programmes to literally reduce reoffending. I think the way that it comes out is it's like civil service jargon.
Right.
But if you look at the derogatory sort of use of the word ex-con, ex-offender, etc., you know, in this country, at 11 years, if you commit a crime at 11 years old, that criminal conviction can stay with you for life. And that's like having a life sentence by instalments through the stigma. And that's kind of what that paper's trying to challenge.
OK, so it's the whole issue of rehabilitation. And of course, there is a legal catch as well in terms of the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, where you're not supposed to refer to previous convictions in some circumstances. So it's a realignment then, in other words, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, one in three men in England have a criminal conviction other than a driving offence. So the problem is how you get people back into society and literally allow them to live their lives post conviction. You know, if you go for any job interview, even now, I'm 52 years of age. My last conviction was 30 years of age, and luckily for me, I don't have to because I've never been for a job interview. But it always asks, have you got a criminal conviction? Not whether it was like 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And so that stigma that's attached to it really stops people from just literally getting on, and that doesn't serve society at all.
OK. Or indeed what the conviction was for. But what about the other end of the scale, those people who continually re-offend, and, you know, the term career criminal, for instance? I mean, should that still apply?
Well, if you have a look at it, like, let's have the definition of what a career criminal is, because I've only met a handful of people, and I believe that's what prison's for, people that have literally made the moral choice to commit crime. You know, some of the politicians that have been in prison, for instance. When we talk about career criminals, often it's like people's lack of ability to have any sort of exploration about making better choices for themselves. You know, that's what prison's supposed to be for, is to punish people by removing them from society, but also to rehabilitate them. So that's the question that we must ask prison guards. Is rehabilitation occurring in British prisons today? I'm very sorry to report that most prisons are currently under some of the same lockdown conditions as the worst part of COVID, 22 hours a day behind a cell door. So whether we like it or not, opportunities to rehabilitate are not occurring in British prisons today.
OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed for joining us and bringing us that alternative viewpoint, of course, about the situation. Thank you. Coming up in this next hour here on GB News, we'll be reflecting on the warning of net migration hitting 1 million. The Prime Minister's official spokesman saying in the past hour, it does remain the government's priority to drive down the overall number people entering the UK, but indications, of course, that the figures could reach a new high. More reaction coming up in a moment. Stay with us.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with your GB News forecast. For many of us, it's a dry afternoon, but there is a lot of cloud, and in some places that cloud is giving drizzly rain, mainly towards the southeast, with a little occluded front coming in from the east, and that's being carried by cold wind from the North Sea. Otherwise, apart from the cloudier zone towards the east and southeast, there's plenty of sunny spells as we end Friday. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western England and Wales faring best for the clear spells. And it's here where the temperatures will fall, particularly overnight, with Northern Ireland and Scotland seeing some fog patches and temperatures down to the mid or even low single figures in places. Much of the rain eases away overnight, but we keep the cloud, and that cloud extensive across central, southern and eastern parts of England in particular as we start off the weekend. Some patches close to the east of Scotland, as well as the far northwest of Scotland as well. But although it will take some time, the cloud across central areas will tend to lift and break up, so sunny spells developing widely for Saturday afternoon. It's looking like a beautiful day for many with long spells of sunshine. Watch out for the high UV and relatively high temperatures, high teens or even low 20s in the south and west. But those temperatures severely curtailed along the North Sea coast because it will stay misty here and we'll have this cool onshore breeze. Into Saturday night, it stays dry in most places. The low cloud will become more extensive again across eastern parts of England, and there'll be some thicker cloud arriving into Scotland and Northern Ireland, along with some outbreaks of rain by the end of the night. Here, a milder night because of the cloud cover, but there'll be a few pockets elsewhere where clear skies will combine with light winds to give temperatures into the mid-single figures. A bright start for northern England, parts of Wales, into the south. The low cloud across central areas clearing away once again. The rain in the north slowly spreading south and turning more showery as it pushes into the south on Monday. Bye-bye.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
crop
failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock. A very good afternoon to you. You're with GB News Live. I'm Mark Longhurst, and coming up for you this Friday afternoon. No ticket to ride this weekend, it seems. Commuters feeling the pain yet again as Train Drivers Union ASLEF stages another walkout today. The RMT joining industrial action tomorrow, just in time for the Eurovision final in Liverpool. UK's economy grew over the first quarter of the year, but only just. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, says it's good news. Labour's Sir Keir Starmer says the 0.1 increase is nothing to celebrate. Who's right? And net migration in the UK could be as high as 1 million this year, despite the government pledging to bring the figures down. Is it another broken promise by Rishi Sunak? And also coming up, Eurovision has hit a sour note. Criticism growing over the ban on President Zelensky joining the celebrations. Is it the right decision? Discussing that in a moment. But first, all the latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Passengers are facing widespread disruption today due to the latest round of train strikes. Members of the ASLEF union are walking out at more than a dozen train operators in a long-running dispute over pay. Tomorrow, RMT members go on strike on the day of the Eurovision Song Contest final in Liverpool. Further strikes by the union will be held on May the 31st and June the 3rd, the day of the FA Cup final at Wembley. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman told GB News the strikes are disappointing.
We have been able to facilitate an offer which has been put to the union leaders. The problem we've got is that they won't put it forward to their members. Similar offers have been put forward to other members of unions and they've accepted them. So logic would dictate if the union leaders did the same, we could see an end to this action, and I'm really sorry for all passengers who have been disrupted today.
Rishi Sunak says he's disappointed with the decision to block Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky from addressing the Eurovision Song Contest. The block's due to concerns from organisers that an address could politicise the event. The Ukrainian president wanted to urge the global audience to continue supporting his country against Russia's invasion. The European Broadcasting Union says it's against the rules. The UK economy grew slightly in the first 3 months of the year, but contracted in March, according to official figures. Growth of 0.1% was recorded by the Office for National Statistics in the first quarter, but in March, the economy shrank by 0.3%, mostly driven by a fall in retail and car sales, as well as ongoing strike action. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt says, although the slight growth is a positive step, there's more work to be done.
Well, these are much better figures than anyone would possibly have predicted, even 3 months ago. And that's partly because of what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday, measures in the budget that are helping to help companies to recruit, tackle some of the underlying problems in the economy. But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
The Archbishop of Canterbury has been convicted of speeding in London. Justin Welby was ordered to pay £510 and given 3 points on his licence for exceeding a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit last October. The hearing was held on the same day he made a rare intervention in the House of Lords, condemning the government's plans to tackle the small boats crisis as morally unacceptable. A Lambeth Palace spokesperson says the Archbishop was aware of the speeding offence but hadn't been notified it had gone to court. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has insisted his party takes allegations of sexual harassment extremely seriously. It follows reports an internal investigation into one case of groping claims took 3 years to complete. In a separate case, a Labour MP has reported one of her party colleagues to the police for alleged sexual assault. Sir Keir Starmer's urging anyone within the party with concerns to come forward.
Well, look, I think all of these allegations have to be taken extremely seriously, and they are taken seriously by me and by the party. I do understand from my experience as Chief Prosecutor how difficult it is for people to come forward. That's among the reasons that we made our process completely independent, so it's not a political process anymore. But what I would say is that I encourage anybody to come forward and to feel that they're supported through that independent process.
Royal Mail's chief executive is to step down. Simon Thompson will leave the role in October after 2 years in the job. The announcement comes just weeks after agreeing a deal with the Communication Workers Union, bringing an end to a year of postal strikes. He says it's the right time to hand over to a new CEO. Elsewhere, Pakistan's ex-Prime Minister Imran Khan is to be released on bail for 2 weeks. The decision from the High Court in Islamabad comes a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest on corruption charges illegal. The events earlier this week have sparked unrest in the country, with almost 2,000 people arrested so far. Imran Khan denies any wrongdoing. And astronomers led by the University of Southampton have spotted what they believe to be the largest cosmic explosion ever seen. It's more than 10 times brighter than any other recorded exploding star, known as a supernova. And to date, it's lasted more than 3 years. Most are only visibly bright for a few months. Researchers say these events are very rare and nothing on this scale has ever been witnessed before. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Mark.
Rhiannon, thank you very much indeed. As we say, yes, more cosmic explosions as they happen. But a bit of a blow-up on the rails, it seems. Meantime, just perhaps when commuters thought things were getting back to some kind of normality, both ASLEF and the RMT pulling the strike levers once more. 16 train companies being affected today. Well, ASLEF's General Secretary accused the government of acting in bad faith and abandoning any direct talks with the union. But the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, said the government cannot modernise the rail network without the introduction of new terms, also criticising the timing of these latest strikes.
With a weekend coming up with Eurovision, the FA Cup final, it feels like events have been targeted deliberately to really impact people the most. And it's really regrettable on Eurovision, which we're hosting for our friends in Ukraine. And it's not good enough for them to say they didn't realise that the events were on, which is what we've been hearing this morning from Mick Whelan, because either he doesn't have a very good sporting and cultural diary, or once he was told, he could have changed the date so they didn't impact. I mean, Eurovision is a great celebration. We should be really proud to host that.
But just to reflect from Mick Whelan, ASLEF's General Secretary, saying he'd not been able to see Hugh Merriman, the Rail Minister, since January the 6th, and the government had been acting in bad faith in his view. Let's get more now from the picket lines. We can speak to Tony Maguire, our Scotland reporter, who's in Glasgow, and our national reporter, Theo Chicombo, he's in Worcester. To you first, Tony, in terms of how things are north of the border. I gather ScotRail is operating some services, but clearly there's still an ASLEF picket line there.
Yes, well, certainly the picket line seems to be dwindling and dispersing, as is the way of it in industrial action typically in Scotland. But certainly for much of the morning, a sea of red, green and blue banners with the ASLEF logo. And up in Scotland, really, the main line that is affected is Avanti West Coast. Now, Avanti West Coast serves between Scotland, England and Northern Wales. Certainly, as you say, ScotRail nationalised last year, and in November last year they reached a deal to avoid this. So luckily, in some ways, I guess, Scotland has been cushioned from much of the disruption, but that doesn't mean that everyone is happy. Certainly anybody looking to get down to Liverpool, as has been mentioned much today on the channel, is going to be at a loss. They're being advised to get a refund and to seek a different way of travel. We know that there's some emergency lines going on, but nothing that's really going to help those Eurovision fans up here in Scotland. Interesting facts, of course, coming out of Westminster today. Rail Minister Hugh Merriman pointing out that the average rail train driver salary is around £60,000, and the 4% that they were offered in April there would have brought them up to £65,000 for an average salary. But certainly ASLEF looking for that 10% rise that aligns with inflation, and certainly the government not too keen to talk to them at that double figure digit right now.
Yeah, and I think 4%, of course, on the table. Let's move over to Theo in Worcester, because, again, a picket line there as well, Theo. And clearly ASLEF indicating they're frustrated with the government not coming to the table, being left to actually negotiate with the separate rail companies in this rail delivery group.
Indeed. Well, the passengers here, they normally use several rail networks, including West Midlands Rail and Great Western Rail. And this allows people to travel to places like Birmingham, to Liverpool, to London and Wales as well. But of course, some of them are saying this is not just about pay. They are actually doing it on behalf of others who work in public sector organisations. Spoken to some of them just a few moments ago, and they say, while we have some of the salaries that Tony mentioned a few minutes ago, this is all about encompassing everybody who's going through the cost of living crisis at the moment. The government is being said that they're incompetent, in the words of those from ASLEF, and they're saying the value of workers' wages is falling. They're also saying when inflation is going up, our wages don't seem to be following the same trend, and that is something they are keen to highlight. Tomorrow we are going to be seeing more rail strikes. The RMT union members will be striking. We'll be hearing from some of those on the picket line from places like Euston. But of course, we know there's a big event this week, Eurovision, where many people are looking to get to, and the roads are likely to be busy because of that.
Indeed. Theo and Tony, thank you for both updating us. And, of course, the allegation from Hugh Merriman about the action being taken to actually coincide with Eurovision. Mick Whelan saying, I don't really watch Eurovision. I didn't know they had a semi-final. If we were targeting Eurovision, we would have done Friday, Saturday and Sunday. More on that, of course, as we get it. But let's reflect elsewhere. It's day 3 of a trial in which many high-profile celebrities, including Prince Harry, have accused Mirror Group newspapers of alleged unlawful information gathering. Well, following the allegations from Prince Harry's lawyer, David Sherborne, stating that systematic and widespread use of private investigators by MGN journalists to unlawfully obtain private information was authorised at senior levels, the former editor, Piers Morgan, has replied by saying he was unaware of phone hacking taking place at the paper while he was in charge, stating, I wouldn't even know how to hack a phone. Well, the court has been hearing from MGN's defence lawyer, Andrew Green, KC. Let's get the latest with our national reporter, Paul Hawkins, who's been following the case. And clearly there are two sides to the story, but it's getting quite sort of involved in terms of who knew what or didn't know what.
Yeah, and that goes to the heart of this case, Mark. Who knew what? Did it happen? And were there attempts to cover it up? And indeed, covering up is the allegation from David Sherborne, the lawyer for the claimants. He said that senior executives, the board at Mirror Group newspaper, tried to cover it up and that they knew that information was being unlawfully gathered. Now, responding to that, Andrew Green, the lawyer for Mirror Group newspaper, has said that that accusation is a smear, as he described it, and he's pointed to the case in 2015 when Mirror Group newspaper admitted to phone hacking and had to pay out hundreds of thousands of pounds worth in compensation for 5 high-profile individuals. And he said that in that case, yes, some phone hacking had occurred, journalists had done it, but executives were cleared then. He said allegations such as covering up phone hacking must be scrutinised with real care, and we say that they have been made without real care. Of course, Mirror Group newspapers deny any phone hacking in relation to these claims. He also went on to point out that the publisher has settled more than 600 cases and paid out more than £100 million in damages and costs. And he said that unlike the 2015 case, in this case, the 4 claimants, in his words, are a very long way from proving their cases, unlike in 2015. And he said that back then there were admissions from Mirror Group newspaper with regards to each specific case, and that one of its former journalists, Dan Evans, had admitted to phone hacking, but that the difference with this case was that he had not, he says that he didn't hack any of these 4 individuals, notably Prince Harry amongst them. So he described the evidence as either slim or non-existent, and he said that there was a deep unreliability and overreach of approach taken by the claimants. So they're going to finish summing up the defence's side of things here this afternoon. Then next week we're going to hear from the witnesses. In fact, over the next 2 or 3 weeks we're going to hear from the witnesses, including, of course, Prince Harry in the first week of June, when hopefully it'll feel a little bit more like summer.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, we're just 3 days in, weeks to go, and we think that Prince Harry will be here, beginning of June?
Yeah, beginning of June, and I think the week before that, or certainly just a little bit further down the road in May, also Alistair Campbell. But yeah, when Prince Harry appears, that's going to be a really significant moment. The first senior royal to be cross-examined in a witness box in a courtroom in the modern era. So he will. He's always said he wanted his day in court, and he's going to get it.
Yeah, indeed, in more ways than one, several days perhaps. Paul, for the moment at the court, thanks for updating us. But let's speak now to media lawyer Jonathan Code, who can join us. And Jonathan, fascinating for you and every other media lawyer, of course, because this is the first time really such a high-profile case has been tested, if you like this in court, certainly in terms of News International. A lot of things settled outside court.
Well, it is, and so many public interest issues come up. I mean, it is absolutely key for us to know as the extent to which the senior management at the Mirror Group knew what was going on. I'm reminded of what Hugh Grant said, however, during the Leveson inquiry, where the issue was how much did Rebecca Brooks know about what was going on at the News of the World. What Hugh Grant said, well, there were only 2 possibilities. Either Rebecca Brooks didn't know what was going on at her own newspaper, in which case she was the worst journalist in the world, or she did, in which case she should take the flak, and that of course could be applied to Piers Morgan.
Yes, who denies, of course, knowing anything about phone hacking. But just in terms of the mechanics, if you like, of the allegations, it does seem that a lot of it is not concerning the journalist directly, but maybe private investigators employed by the paper as an entity pursuing non-journalistic activity, should we put it that way?
Well, that's very much how it was with the News of the World as well. And that, of course, raises another issue, I think, going back to management. Now, what is being said, and it's entirely credible, is that vast sums of money, millions of pounds, were spent on these dodgy investigators. Now, is it really credible that senior management didn't see all this money flying out of the door and wonder what it was being paid for?
And what about the issue that the defence has been approaching, that this was all a very long time ago and there should be some kind of limitation set on all these things?
Well, there is the Limitation Act, which sets 6 years as the period with which you should bring this kind of claim. However, what the Limitation Act also says is that where a wrongdoing has been covered up, and the people who were the victims of that wrongdoing didn't know it had happened, then obviously they should not be caught by that 6-year period. And the limitation period should begin either at the point where they found out that this activity was going on, or, and this is the key battleground during this trial, at the point where they should reasonably expect it to have found it out. Now, what the paper is saying is that there was all this information out there in the ether, which should have put Prince Harry and Hugh Grant on notice that this activity was going on. The problem that the newspaper has is that they're in effect saying, and of course, they shouldn't have believed our denials. So it's a bit of an odd position for the newspaper to take.
So you can't have it both ways, but effectively the clock starts ticking when it becomes active then as such?
Well, the clock starts ticking only when either the information became available to this claimant, or this claimant should, if they'd been making any kind of reasonable effort to find out what's going on, should have learnt that this activity, they'd been the victim of this activity. Right. Now, that is obviously quite a difficult thing for the court to determine, because you're kind of looking into the mind of the claimant and also trying to establish what they knew at any particular time. Of course, in Prince Harry's case, for quite a long time, he was in Afghanistan, as David Sherborne has said. So he can hardly be criticised for not knowing what's going on when he's in the front line fighting the Taliban.
Now, of course, the other issue, as Paul has just touched on outside the court, is that when Prince Harry attends court, he will be open to cross-examination, and that could be quite revelatory and put him in a difficult position. This, again, will be fascinating, I guess, for many lawyers to see how this plays out in open court.
Well, I think not just lawyers.
Well, yes, indeed.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, contradict
No,
you.
indeed.
But I mean, it's extraordinary that it's such a senior member of the royal family. This is the first time it has happened since the 19th century. Other members of the royal family, Prince Harry's father brought a claim against the Mail about the Hong Kong diaries, but he was given summary judgment and he never had to give evidence in the witness box. But Prince Harry is going to be fiercely cross-examined. It's clear that the temperature in that trial room is hotting up. And I doubt whether the newspaper's KC is going to spare him. So, pardon the pun. So I imagine, that it is going to be quite a fiery exchange, because Prince Harry is clearly pumped and he's determined he's going to speak his mind.
OK, we'll wait, as you say, for that performance, if that's the right word, in the courtroom. But Jonathan, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and we'll keep you updated, of course, on the trial itself, and Paul will be there for us. Also coming up, fears that migration or net migration could top 1 million. What's behind the rise? What does it mean for the government, of course, who pledged to bring the numbers down? We'll be hearing from a former Home Office minister. Stay with us.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
And welcome back to GB News Live. Now, we're being told net migration could top 1 million people by the end of this year, despite, of course, the Conservative government pledge in 2019 to bring migration levels down. Well, the analysis suggests, we understand, that the figure could be as high as 997,000 when the official figures are published in a couple of weeks' time, although another analysis suggests it could be a bit lower at 650,000. But that both figures smashing the previous peak of 504,000. Let's get the opinion now of a former Home Office Minister, Norman Baker, who can join us. Norman, thank you for your time. We stress, of course, these are not official figures as yet. We have to wait for that, I think, May the 25th. But interesting that Downing Street already reacting to these suggested figures. Downing Street denying Rishi Sunak has contradictory aims in relation to net migration. The official spokesman saying it remained the government's priority to drive down the overall number of people entering the UK.
Well, I mean, this has been a Conservative objective going back to my time in the Home Office. Theresa May, as Home Secretary, was very keen to drive numbers down, and she set an arbitrary target in those days, which couldn't be achieved because there was no control over EU migration, either in or out. And indeed, my understanding is that the wish to control migration was certainly one of the driving forces behind people voting for Brexit. Well, those people who voted for Brexit will now feel, I suspect, rather betrayed, because what's happened since then has been that figures have increased enormously. And one of the reasons they've been increasing is because under EU rules, when we were part of the EU, there was a policy and an option under the Dublin Agreement to return people to the country from where they come, in other words, to a different European country. Obviously, yeah. That's no longer the case because we no longer have a deal with the EU.
Yeah, a suggestion, as you say, that these are non-EU migrants to study, to work or escape conflict or oppression is the phrase that's being used. But, I mean, we reflect that the Office for Budget Responsibility has previously said legal migration actually can offset slower growth in productivity of the economy. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, acknowledging back in November it was very important to the economy. And, of course, we've seen just today the latest growth figures suggesting it's pretty flat line at the moment, 0.1% for the 3 months to March.
Well, the economy is not doing very well. We're lagging behind other members of the G7 in particular, even on a par with Russia, which isn't saying much for the economy at the moment. And it's perfectly true that immigration in certain sectors is vital to the economy. And what happened after Brexit was that a whole lot of people from the European Union went home. They were often quite integral to our economy, and they've been replaced by others who don't necessarily have the same skills. So, for example, we don't have enough people to pick fruit in our fields. We got shortage of people with the NHS. So there's no guarantee that the people who are coming in now have got the necessary skills to fill the gap left by EU residents who went home.
Yeah, but of course there is the political difficulty for the government, given the undertaking or promise, call it what you will, that was made back in 2019 to get the net figures down. And I'm just looking at what the Prime Minister's spokesman said earlier, saying he did not believe that Mr Sunak had ever put a figure on how much he would like to see migration fall. Well, that might be the case, but certainly this is not going to help his situation, is it?
No, I mean, the Conservatives have had figures before. Theresa May had a figure, and so did David Cameron. I don't think Rishi Sunak has had a figure, but nevertheless, the clear indication of what the government wanted to do and the clear indication of Brexit was to drive the numbers down. Instead, we're seeing them rising. Now, because the government has made such a thing about boats in the Channel, they've elevated that issue beyond probably where it needs to go. I'm not saying it's not important, but beyond where it would otherwise be on the political spectrum. And the consequence of that is they're hoisted by their own petard, because they've now made this a big issue and they can't control it. So politically, this is becoming very, very toxic for the Conservatives.
Yeah, I think Sir Keir Starmer's reflection earlier was that the government had completely lost control. We need a managed approach, and we haven't got that. Although we do have this points-based system, don't we, in terms of skills for applicants and visas and so on, that there is that in place.
Yes, there is, and that, in a sense, is a sensible approach. But, I mean, we have to get, in my view, a better relationship with our EU neighbours in order to be able to return people to European Union countries, as we could do in the past, where we have people coming in who've no reason to be here and aren't at threat of their lives. And unfortunately, what's happened, because the whole thing has become so toxic, is there's now a mixing up of people who are coming here for economic reasons and people who are coming here because they are genuinely in fear of their life and seeking refugee status. And those two things have been conflated, and they're rather different. And the government's not been keen to separate those. It's just concentrated on the overall figure. So, frankly, the whole situation's a mess. And it's become a mess because of the way the government's handled it. And it's becoming a big issue for them because they've elevated it to be one of the top issues.
Indeed, as Stop the Boats as well. Norman, as ever, thank you for bringing us your analysis of the situation. And, of course, we'll, I think, get those figures in a couple of weeks' time in detail. Coming up, the difficulties there for the government. What about the Labour Party? Well, it's under scrutiny now, we're being told, after the Met Police announced they will not be investigating a claim of sexual assault against a shadow minister. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer saying the allegations are taken extremely seriously. What are they? We'll be discussing that shortly, but let's get an update on all the headlines now with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Passengers are facing widespread disruption across the network today due to the latest round of train strikes. Members of the ASLEF union are walking out at more than a dozen train operators in a long-running dispute over pay. Tomorrow, RMT members go on strike, disrupting travel to the final of the Eurovision Song Contest in Liverpool. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak says he's disappointed with the decision to block Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky from addressing the Eurovision Song Contest. Boris Johnson's also expressed his disappointment, tweeting, "There's only one reason the contest isn't in Ukraine, and that's because of Putin's illegal war." The block is due to concerns that organisers think that an address could politicise the event. The European Broadcasting Union says it's against the rules. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has insisted his party takes allegations of sexual harassment extremely seriously. It follows reports an internal investigation into one case of groping claims took 3 years to complete. In a separate case, a Labour MP has reported one of her party colleagues to the police for alleged sexual assault. Sir Keir Starmer is urging anyone within the party with concerns to come forward.
Well, look, I think all of these allegations have to be taken extremely seriously, and they are taken seriously by me and by the party. I do understand from my experience as Chief Prosecutor how difficult it is for people to come forward. That's among the reasons that we made our process completely independent, so it's not a political process anymore. But what I would say is that I encourage anybody to come forward and to feel that they're supported through that independent process.
And the UK economy grew slightly in the first 3 months of the year, but contracted in March, according to official figures. Growth of 0.1% was recorded by the Office for National Statistics in the first quarter, but in March, the economy shrank by 0.3%, mostly driven by a fall in retail and car sales, as well as ongoing strike action. TV online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn, this is GB News, but don't go anywhere. Mark will be back in just a moment with GB News Live. I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
all sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back to GB News Live. And the state of the economy, is it in a state? Well, certainly the latest figures show that the economy grew by only 0.1% for the first 3 months of the year. But for March alone, it actually contracted 0.3% down, driven by a poor performance in the services sector. Labour's leader Sir Keir Starmer saying it was nothing to celebrate. But this is what the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt had to say in reaction earlier.
Well, these are much better figures than anyone would possibly have predicted, even 3 months ago. And that's partly because of what the Governor of the Bank of England said yesterday, measures in the budget that are helping to help companies to recruit, tackle some of the underlying problems in the economy. But there is still much work to do. We still have inflation that is much too high. That's causing a lot of pressure for families up and down the country. That's why we've got to stick to our plan to get inflation down, to get growth up, and to get the economy motoring in the way that we all want.
Can we get the economy motoring? Let's get the views now. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, who can join us. Justin, thank you for your time. I mean, just to reflect first on these figures, not too bad for January, flat lines in February, and then falls in March. I mean, is that an indication of things to come?
Well, it's flat. It's flat as a pancake. And frankly, I've seen more interesting pancakes. All of these numbers are tiny. They're rounding errors or rounding benefits. Either way, what it's showing is actually we haven't grown. Now, but the good news, you just pointed out, we haven't really shrunk either. And considering actually what the Bank of England was saying last year, and also our various chancellors, we were heading for a recession. But in fact, actually, we've avoided recession. Actually, it's better than where we expected, but the numbers are still tiny. No, what they have to do now is actually make sure that the driving area of the economy, smaller businesses, have the confidence to invest and go out and grow, and that is infectious. And you don't do that by throwing money at it. The government can do it by actually encouraging more tax relief, tax incentives to try and actually get more money domestically and internationally going into the economy. So not tax breaks, which I know a lot of the Conservatives always go on about cutting taxes the entire time. We know that doesn't work very well. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. But encouraging an entrepreneurial society, which to a great extent we are, in high-tech areas and those high-tech hubs around the country, that's how we get out of this.
However, how about the flip side? You know, yet another rate rise yesterday, perhaps another two in the pipeline to tackle inflation, makes it even more expensive to invest and raise money to get businesses going.
It does indeed. You're absolutely right. So actually what we're seeing is inflation is coming down, ours being more stubborn. The EU, their inflation level it's very odd because you've got all those countries in the Eurozone and they vary from very low inflation in someone like Malta to quite high inflation in someone like Lithuania. So you have to put a point in, pick somewhere in the middle of that, so more of a guesswork. America's different because America can look after itself. So it doesn't have quite so much the same pricing powers that they've got. So we're behind on that. We should have put up interest rates beforehand. Your colleague Liam Halligan was pressing for this, nearly 2 years ago. And so we will start to see rates not rise so much and might even this time next year see them come down. And that's going to be so crucial because, again, the primary driver of the economy, apart from small businesses, is you and I, the British consumer. We account for about 60% of that economy. And, as we all know, we've been worse off because what's happened to the interest rates, the idiotic issues we had with a sort of temporary chancellor and prime minister a few months back, all have damaged not just our reputation but confidence. Actually, under Ricky, it's sort of coming back again. And so I find that pretty encouraging.
OK, but what about then confidence or our faith in the Bank of England? I mean, as you were saying, originally they were indicating it would be a recession, even though a shallow one, and suggestions, of course, that maybe they got one or two. Other central banks have done the same. But just looking at their predictions yesterday for growth in the economy, they were actually looking at, 2.25% higher at the end of the three-year forecasting period than they said back in February. I mean, they seem to be thinking things will start to take off.
Well, half of their job is actually try and make sure that we're not filled with doom and despair. But you have to be really very careful because the one thing the Bank of England is consistent with is actually with its figures being wrong. Now, that's a cheap jibe on my part, but it's very difficult. With figures we're dealing with at the moment, you're sticking your finger in the air and hoping for the best. And there's not much more they can do about it. Quite rightly, they are focusing on inflation to get that down because that is devastating to people, particularly people on fixed income, and it's just seen the value disappear. And so what they have to do is actually give us the confidence to know that it's peaking and it'll start to come down. And if you can just make sure that people have confidence to know that, that actually we're going to start seeing changes coming through. The pain has been caused quite often for people at the wrong end of society, the poorest, because the inflation areas we've seen has often been on basic foodstuffs and things like that. Whereas for wealthier people, that doesn't really affect them. But also inflation is a very bad measure. Now, my inflation as I get older tends to be higher because of the drugs I take. Not those drugs, but the ones because I'm getting older. But the younger people, their inflation actually is at a lower level because they buy electronic goods and games and things like that. They generally go down in price. So it's very difficult to measure it. But we mustn't actually throw ourselves into a pit of doom here and despondency. Go back to those tech hubs around the country, and they're not in London, they're all over the place. What they need is further incentives to attract money in, to make sure that we've got the next generation of companies like Arm and the ones like that. All too often we start them, develop them, and the dear old Americans come along and buy them and take them off to Silicon Valley. So about time we start doing more, even more for ourselves.
OK, and when we say drugs, of course, we should add prescriptions over the counter. But good to see that they're doing their job anyway, the looks of it. As ever, Justin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer insisting his party takes allegations of sexual harassment extremely seriously. It follows revelations of an internal investigation into claims of groping that took 3 years to complete. Not the groping, but the investigation. His comments also following the revelation in a separate case of a Labour MP reporting one of her party colleagues to the police for alleged sexual assault. Well, Sir Keir urging anyone within the party with concerns now to come forward. Our political reporter Olivia Utley with us in the studio to tell us more. And it's derailed Labour's efforts today to talk about the NHS, and everyone's got the focus on these internal problems.
It's very awkward indeed, really, for Keir Starmer. At the beginning of this year, he presided over a change in the internal complaints procedure for Labour after the watchdog ruled that their complaints procedure for anti-Semitism simply wasn't good enough. So there's been this big overhaul of the complaints procedure. But it doesn't seem to be working that well because at the moment we have 2 live cases. One of them is this aide, a very senior aide to a shadow minister on the front bench, who was accused by an intern 20 years his junior of groping her. This investigation has taken 3 years to complete. At one point, it was dismissed. Then at another point, he had to write her a letter of apology, but it wasn't taken any further. And he has now finally resigned, but not as a direct result of Labour's complaints procedure.
OK. And no names for legal reasons, we should add that. It's not that we're sort of not doing our job in revealing that. But, I mean, particularly for Sir Keir, this is difficult and embarrassing because of his previous legal experience.
Well, exactly. Given his background, one would expect that this is exactly the sort of thing he would be fantastically good at.
Yeah.
But it feels as though he's lost a bit of control over the procedure. Also, of course, when he took the reins, when he became leader of the opposition 3 years ago, his big promise was to clean up Labour after Jeremy Corbyn. And although it pretty much everyone on both sides of the House would agree that he has done well at turning over the page from Corbynism and getting rid of some of that nasty anti-Semitism that was in the party. If there are these cases of sort of sexual harassment sort of swirling round that Labour can't seem to get a grip on, it's not a very good look for Labour. And as you say, it does overshadow some of their policy ideas.
Yeah, OK, well, we'll continue to monitor that. But Sir Keir saying that the allegations taken extremely seriously and that the party's internal complaints procedure was completely independent of any political influence. For the moment, Olivia, thank you for that. We'll see what emerges, of course, in the Sunday newspapers, perhaps, on that. But, of course, it's also distracted in what Labour wanted to talk about today, and that is the NHS and cancer care. Sir Keir meeting medical leaders to discuss Labour's plans to tackle cancer backlogs, including training more doctors and nurses, shifting the focus to early diagnosis and intervention. Well, let's now speak to cancer and global health expert at King's College London, Professor Richard Sullivan. Richard, thank you for your time. And I guess the emphasis particularly on this issue of early diagnosis, and that ties into all the waiting list, people still waiting to be seen by a cancer expert.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, I mean, let's be clear, we do have a significant issue in many parts of the country in terms of early diagnosis. But if you step back a little bit, it's not just about early diagnosis. I think the cancer system in the UK needs a radical overhaul. And whilst this is a welcome focus on one particular part of the pathway, we really need to look at everything from the social determinants all the way through to palliative care and survivorship. So, Keir Starmer's definitely saying the right things in terms of early diagnosis, in terms of workforce. But we really need a radical overhaul here and to reverse what has been decades of disinvestment in both the NHS and also disinvestment in cancer care. And actually, the OECD put it very well. We've seen essentially a 23% less funding going into cancer care compared to other high-income countries across Europe. And that simply has to be reversed. The outcomes, really, and improving outcomes are going to take many years to improve.
Yeah.
But sadly, we are in a situation now that requires a radical restructure.
And when you talk about radical restructure and pathways and so on, is one of the ideas to bypass the GP, to get someone to an expert far more quickly and perhaps cancer specialist units?
So we've had these new community diagnostic centres put in by this current government, and new investment, and that, of course, is welcome. But to be blunt with you, that is a drop in the ocean. And GPs are still an absolutely critical aspect of the patient pathway for cancer care, both going to cancer care and also post-cancer in terms of being looked after. And the reality is what we've seen is 2,000 less GPs over the last decade, but they're now doing 5 to 10% more work. And to be absolutely honest with you, we still need to strengthen our primary and community care. It's not enough to say we're going to refer people directly into hospitals here. This is an end-to-end pathway problem. So GPs are still absolutely critical.
OK. Professor Richard Sullivan, thank you for that. And as you say, certainly the politicians seem having to wrangle with it at the moment. But thank you for your time here in GB News. Now, day 3 of Northern Ireland's high-profile food and agricultural event, the Balmoral Show, renowned for sheep shearing, show jumping, tractors, as we've seen. But let's reflect on the pigs as well. Yes, they're a very important part of the farmyard. Let's bring in our reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, you were celebrating the Ferguson tractor last time round. You got a few porkers for this time.
Indeed, porkers we have. And joining me is Vaughan Byrne, and he knows all about it. Vaughan, tell us, what is the current state of the pig market in Northern Ireland?
Well, it's not very good, Dougie, because feedstuffs, general things aren't great all round, and they're very expensive to keep, and they're up and down in terms of markets. So we're going through a bad time. We've had a couple of good years and we're going through a baddish time. They're coming back a little bit, but really it's a very expensive hobby, and also for the commercial guys it's very difficult.
So next to impossible to make a living out of it?
Can't. A lot of our folks here are hobby farmers, and that's all it is at the moment. It's a hobby. It's like a guy having a set of golf clubs. These guys put their money towards their pigs and they love them dearly.
Well, there is a few historical facts about pigs, and one of them, of course, is why the policemen are called the pigs sometimes. Why is that?
Allegedly, Robert Peel, who invented or created the Metropolitan Police, and he was a politician, and he invented the Royal Irish Constabulary in 1816, and he was also developed the Metropolitan Police in 1828. So the Irish police are here longer than the Metropolitan Police. He was a farmer, and in Ireland he found Tamworth pigs. And shot here, John, to Tamworth pigs. They're the ginger guys. Now, so he was Robert Peel. So you get bobbies, and you get peelers, and then you get a derogatory term, pigs. Because he was a pig keeper.
And why the bowler hat?
The bowler hat, that's out of respect to our animals. It's traditional that you wear a bowler hat. I'm sorry you didn't have a bowler hat. We'll maybe get you one.
Well, all I can say, Mark, is that's another fine mess you've got me into.
You could have found one that fitted you, but there we are. And our respect to the Tamworth pigs as well behind you. Thank you very much indeed for updating us there at the Balmoral Show. And our apologies to all police officers, but it was meant in the nicest possible way, of course. Now, final preparations for Eurovision underway in Liverpool. The 67th song contest taking place tomorrow night. Liverpool selected, of course, as host city on behalf of last year's winners, Ukraine. Well, our northwest of England reporter Sophie Reaper is at Liverpool Arena. And Sophie, of course, it's in the headlines as well for this controversy with Rishi Sunak saying he's disappointed by the decision of the European Broadcasting Union to block President Zelensky from addressing the final. But you managed to speak to plenty of other Ukrainians there to make up for that.
I have indeed. I've been speaking to them over the last few days while we've been here in Liverpool, and not one of them has had any concerns of that nature. Of course, with every Eurovision, there's always some controversy. But I think for everyone here in Liverpool and for everyone who'll be tuning into the grand final tomorrow, they just want to enjoy the atmosphere and the fun that comes hand in hand with Eurovision.
Of the event itself, I gather that the running order has been established and UK is going right at the end. I mean, are they interpreting that as a good or a bad thing?
Well, usually the act that goes last is the freshest in voters' memories, so that could be a little bit tactical. This afternoon we've been at the dress rehearsal here at the M&S Bank Arena for the grand final tomorrow night. And let me just tell you, if people have been impressed by the way the city of Liverpool has been adorned for this event, just wait until they see the stage tomorrow night at the grand final in all of its glory. We've seen each of the acts one by one. We started off with the flag parade, where each of the 26 countries were able to come out and give their people a wave and just show off a little with Eurovision. We've also seen the hosts of Eurovision. They've been practicing their parts for tomorrow night. And then one by one, we've seen each of the 26 countries take to the stage in order to practice. We've seen them with dancers. We've seen them with their makeup and costume. We've seen them with props. of which was the French act, who we haven't seen yet in the semi-finals, because France, along with 4 other countries, are the big countries, so they automatically get a place in the final. We saw France for the first time today, and she was in a 20-foot tall black sparkly dress. I don't want to spoil it too much for any of our viewers who'll be tuning in tomorrow night, but I will say this: each of the countries has put on quite a show. It's been absolutely incredible. The work that's gone into it is so evident, and I just must say, well done to Liverpool. They've done an incredible job so far, and I'm sure that will continue till tomorrow night.
Yeah, another part of Liverpool's wonderful musical legacy. Sophie, thanks very much for updating us there, and good luck, of course, to all those. Now, let's tell you about the flash flooding, of course, that's hit parts of southwestern England in these past few days. Led to a major incident being declared. Some areas seeing 2 weeks of rain in just a few hours. Somerset and Devon, the worst affected. Well, the floods themselves have now receded, but it's left quite a legacy. Let's get more with Jeff Moody, our southwest of England reporter. Because, Jeff, as we discussed last time, it's not just the water, it's what it leaves behind and the legacy of having to clean it up.
Well, absolutely. We've had environmental health here for most of the day, checking all of the houses to try and find out exactly what it is. Everyone here is pretty confused because there's no rivers around. This area doesn't have a river for miles, so it's not that a river has burst its banks, but what happened on Tuesday was so ferocious and so violent almost. I was caught in it myself, and it was really quite painful, with sleet coming at you the houses here, there's about 20 houses and a little close around this place, Ven Ottery. They were knee-deep and in some cases waist-deep in water. Well, earlier on, I spoke to the manager from the Bowhays tree farm here in Ven Ottery. He said there was no warning at all.
There was no warning. I don't know what stage that's at the moment. There was a test a few weeks ago. It worked on my phone, didn't work on everybody's phone. I believe that it was for events that were to preserve life, just in case there was a risk to life. This could have been a lot worse. Whether or not flooding is on that list, I would have thought so, but no, there was no warning whatsoever.
Well, it could indeed have been a lot worse, but now the shock has passed. People are trying to get their livelihoods back up and running and to get their homes in a condition that they can live in. But nobody here knows how long that's going to take.
Indeed, and weather eye being kept out on the forecast as well, with perhaps a bit more rain in the next week or so. But Jeff, for the moment, thanks for updating us there, and we'll keep people updated on the situation there in Devon and Somerset, of course. Let's bring you some breaking news that we're getting from Newcastle Crown Court. A sex offender has been convicted of murdering a 7-year-old girl after escaping justice for more than 30 years. David Boyd, who's 55, has been convicted at court of the murder in 1992 of 7-year-old Nikki Allen. She was battered, stabbed and dumped in a derelict Sunderland warehouse. More on that coming up in the news bulletin with Rhiannon. And also more coming up, of course, on all the stories of the day with Patrick. He's with you, but we're back with you at 12 noon on Monday. Stay with us here on GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how